fanatics? It's college football with Sam. A little bit of a later start time to our show than usual, but I went on a 12.5 mile bike ride around where I live, which was fun. So getting in my physical activity. And tonight is more of a jam-packed show than anything we had last week. Last week we had 4 shows, but they often were briefer in terms of topics than today's show. And today's show, I wanted to be larger, but I only got about half of the show done before I went on the bike ride, and then after the bike ride, my capacity to work just collapsed. I was getting probably a third or a quarter done per hour spent on work after my bike ride than before my bike ride. But anyway, all that being said, we still have several topics to get to today. I want to discuss my ACC predictions. I also want to briefly touch on some recruiting updates, not to the degree that I originally was going to, but still touch on it a little bit as the show kicks off. And we'll also talk about Texas versus Ohio State, Michigan versus Oklahoma, Notre Dame versus Miami. This week, I will also touch on, not today, but this week, Nebraska versus Cincinnati, LSU versus Clemson, and then I don't quite have the 6th game figured out yet, but I am going to figure it out. There will be 3 more early game previews and predictions that I will talk about. And we're not just doing this for the non-conference games. We're going to be doing Michigan versus Ohio State here in a week or two in this segment, just going through some key games throughout the season and me giving you my thoughts on those games and just like a way too early fun summer prediction for them. A prediction, obviously, that's very much subject to change, especially for those later games, because I'm essentially predicting how those teams will do in the regular season and then factoring that in to my prediction, which is weird, but fun. It's the preseason, so why can't we talk about what we want to talk about here on College Football with Sam? And then an additional dive in to the ACC predictions yields me giving specific record predictions and more in-depth previews for Notre Dame, Clemson, and Miami, which we will be doing tonight. So that is what's on the agenda here. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to hit the notification bell. If you have something to say that you want me to respond to, or if you want to support the channel, you can always send a super chat, and I would greatly appreciate that. And yeah, we're going to really start it off with recruiting updates is how I want to segue in to this live show. So we already talked about, I think on Friday, that Baylor was building a pretty good class. Over the weekend, LSU got some commits and vaulted all the way up to the 7th best class in America. We also have Alabama retaining their top 5 spot. Georgia got a commitment from Caden Protho, 5-star tight end, and they move up to the 2nd best class. So they were already there, but they're closing in on USC. I mean, if Georgia really gets one more 4-star commit, and that'll have them hit 30 commits, and 23 of their commits in that scenario would be 4 or 5-star players, which is crazy, they would then take over USC spot as the number 1 class in America. Clemson today earned a commit, a key commit at safety. Just looking for him right now. They earned a commitment from safety Blake Stewart out of Atlanta, Georgia. Earned him over Michigan, and I forget who else. Penn State finally fell outside of the top 15, being leapfrogged by Florida. Florida got a commitment from KJ Ford 2 days ago on Friday, defensive end. Ohio State and Alabama wanted him, but he ended up going with the Gators. And then a day after that, they got Hezzy Kent at tight end, listed 6'6", 310 pounds out of Georgia. Florida right now is a top 15 recruiting class, and they are definitely building momentum. Baylor also has a top 25 recruiting class. We talked about that a little bit on Friday, but it seems like they have a lot of momentum and definitely a willingness to spend that not a lot of other schools have. And that's important. And I think it's important because we saw this weekend news coming out about how certain people want to challenge the current house settlement and NIL go rules. And I think they're ultimately going to succeed. You know my guys' thoughts on this. They're not going to be able to limit these student athletes getting paid. They're not going to be able to do that without a collective bargaining agreement. And the people who want there to be limitations without a CBA, I understand it, because that's how it used to be. But by allowing the players to get paid, this box is opened. And you're not going to be able to put a restraint on it without a collective bargaining agreement where the players, where the coaches, where the school administrators all agree to come together and have the players unionize, and you set you set stiffer restrictions and also stiffer guidelines, like player safety, for example, or workers' comp. What the NFL has, different, you're on the injured reserve, or you can be moved up or off of the scout team, for example. All these different things that, some you have in college, but others you definitely don't. College doesn't have a collective bargaining agreement, and unlike the NFL, which is, one big cartel, college football operates as, the SEC, ACC, Big Ten, and, the conferences aren't even as strong. They're not as strongly knitted together. They aren't their own cartels. They're kind of separate entities, the different universities that function under a banner. And yes, a set of agreements for sure, but it's not so tightly woven. And then you take all those different conferences with all these different incentives, some with different rules. For example, in the SEC, you can't transfer around the SEC in the spring window. At least usually you can't. That's not the case in other conferences. You need a collective bargaining agreement to restrict the payments that these players will receive. And some of these schools that I think are hoping for this to work, it's either not going to affect them in the way that they want. For example, if you were a school outside of the SEC and you were rooting for these restrictions, you were actively rooting for the Deep South to once again have the dominance they had from the late 2000s to early 2020s. You just are. The Deep South has a better networking system. They have states that, in terms of viewing football as a religion and of being politically aligned, are going to just produce easier avenues to get players the money they want and not report it. Some would call that cheating. Right now, it's perfectly legal, and I still think it is under the current terms. You can't actually restrict the amount a player's getting compensated. You can't manipulate the market. They're trying to, but this is not going to hold up in court. Someone's going to sue. It feels like this lawsuit's coming within the next few weeks. And again, I'm not an insider. I'm not telling you I know this is going to happen, but that's what it feels like. And it feels like some of these schools that want these restrictions are either in the Deep South, or they are some of these schools outside of the Deep South who don't like it that their unanimous placement as the number one program in their conference, or it used to be unanimous, is now very much being challenged on all fronts because the environment's changed. So the Southern schools don't have the alumni base that the Northern schools do, so they can't pay out as much if this keeps ramping up. They'll lose in the arms race. And then for Ohio State, for example, Ohio State doesn't want Oregon and USC to recruit at the level they are. And if you put on hard restrictions, if you do that, honestly, in my mind, that won't change much because it'll restrict Ohio State too. And Ohio State's not as good at under-the-table deals or under-the-table payments as a lot of these Southern schools are. I don't even know if they're much better than USC at that historically. Again, not getting into too many conspiracy theories because I really don't care. I don't. About, cheating this or cheating that. Just find out whether it was real, punish it, and move on. And then after you've punished the school for committing violations and you've moved on, punishment's done, and now you can, treat them as a, law-abiding university, law-abiding football program. But we can't do that because being objective apparently in the sport of college football like this is wrong. It's just wrong. But that's my opinion really on this whole recruiting madness, is this whole thing about, there's a salary cap you have to follow. It's a bunch of malarkey. Some schools wish that it would work, and they're probably playing cognitive dissonance and saying, well, if we play by the rules, it will work. That's not how reality works. Baylor and Texas Tech are going to be winners here, and Oklahoma is going to be a loser if those schools continue with their current strategies. Ohio State could cost themselves being the national title favorite entering next year if they abide by the salary cap rules and other schools don't, and therefore they can't pay their returning starters the market value that you would like to if you want to bring all of them back to what, in my mind, would be winning the national championship this coming season, or not this coming season, but the season after 2025, in 2026. And then it's the same thing if you're Texas. I know some Texas fans have been clamoring, these restrictions are going to, help us. They're not going to help you. Texas, I think right now is hedging their bets a little bit, but ultimately, based on some of the players they've pulled in, the way they've spent in the past, and the way I know they're spending on their roster, I think they believe to a certain degree this is going to fail. But they're hedging their bets a little bit, and Texas traditionally starts off slow in recruiting, like Sarkisian's most recent mentor, Saban, and then they finish really strongly. They're actually ahead of schedule if you look at the amount of commits they have. Ohio State's even on schedule. So all this recruiting drama that's happened, and maybe I've even bought into and talked about a little bit, I don't think it's this massive deal. I don't think it's this big thing, if I'm being like truthful with you guys. I think the only big news right now in recruiting is the fact that if you are betting this thing works, and maybe I'm the moron here, but I think if you are a program and you're betting this house settlement works in its current writing, I think that you don't know what you are looking at. Or maybe you have the right spirit and college football should operate how you want it to, but that's not what reality is. I don't know how you can manipulate the market now. I don't know how you can get away with that, especially with all these different, states and different courts that interpret these things differently. Some will side with, the employee, which schools aren't employers right now. They're still not. It's more of a, student-teacher relationship that goes on with these student athletes than a employee-employer relationship, which you're going to have to change that if you want to restrict these salaries. And there are schools that, not schools, but states, yes, that will side with the school. There are others that will side with the player. And schools in the South, or states in the South, I keep getting this mixed up because I'm tired, but states in the South will, I think, maybe side with the player too, because are they really going to want to restrict their team's ability to compete? I don't know about that. I think that right now there's just a lot of confusion. There's a lot I don't know. There's a lot that you don't know. But yeah. And I have read the things about federal law. I have read that. But that doesn't mean I'll have to read more into it. This is why I'm not doing an official segment on it, because I'm kind of, talking right now. That's what I'm doing. So I'll have to read more about that, but I still think it can be challenged. And I think that, look, the courts and the legislation ruled in different parts in favor of paying players. And when some tried to stop it, they were shot down. I kind of view this as the same thing right now. Of course, people want order. Of course, people want controls. But more than anything, they will want fairness. And these current NIL Go things, just look who's supporting it, by the way, for example. It won't enforce fairness. That's why That's why these SEC schools in Ohio State are sponsoring it, because they know that this will allow them to pay their players more, and then Baylor and Texas Tech won't be able to pay their players the same amount. That's what this is. Like these restrictions will benefit especially the SEC, and they will ensure that the Big Ten doesn't lose recruits to the ACC and the Big 12, and then ensure the SEC can basically get whoever they want. Maybe I'm cynical there, but that is my take on all of this. I hate the whole conversation about it. I think a lot of different schools, whether, pro-house settlement, anti-house settlement, pro-NIL go, anti-NIL go, I think there's a lot of cope going around. A lot of cope. And the reality is that some schools, because they're investing so heavily in one side or the other, some will absolutely get a kick in the jewels, depending on what direction this goes. I mean, if this is actually enforceable and I'm wrong, then USC and a lot of these Big 12 schools that are ponying up big money are in trouble. If it's the other way and there are no new rules, well, Ohio State may have willingly shot their pinky toe off. Pinky toe because Ohio State's still such a big brand, and they'll quickly mobilize additional funds if this goes the other way. So it won't really hurt them that much, but it'll be like them stubbing their own toe. And for a program like Auburn, it will be like blowing their whole leg off, depending on how this goes. But enough of my chitter chatter. I want to get into my ACC predictions and then all this other stuff, because I don't want to be live past 10, and it seems like that's going to be the current track we're going on if I keep rambling. So enough of my rambling. Let's talk about my ACC and Notre Dame regular season and post-season predictions. Wait 1 second. Wow. Yeah, I had to burp. So I didn't want you guys hearing that. Maybe saying it's unprofessional, but I think doing it on air would have been even more unprofessional. And also, let me change one thing. Just one thing. Before we resume this. I see something that's irritating me, and I want to fix it. So I am going to fix it, and that will be good. There we go. Okay. So let me change this. There. Okay. Thank you for your patience. Let's get to my ACC predictions now, and also talk about Notre Dame lumping them in with the ACC. How will the ACC shake out in the regular and postseason in 2025? That's the question I want to answer in form of my ACC plus Notre Dame record predictions for this fall. I'm incorporating Notre Dame because I don't want to talk about Notre Dame and UConn in a independence record predictions video, and Notre Dame's affiliated with the ACC in every other sport as a member of the ACC conference outside of hockey, which they're a Big Ten member, and they have to play a set amount of ACC games every year anyway. And I, by the way, am very excited for their upcoming, I think, 10-year series with Clemson. I cannot wait to see that play out. And heck, maybe we'll see a Notre Dame-Clemson playoff game this year. I think the odds of that happening are pretty high for just any given matchup between two teams, and the odds of that happening in the playoffs are just low because of how many teams, even if you shrink down all the teams into only realistic playoff contenders, only teams that have more than, say, maybe a 1 or 5 or 10% chance of making the playoffs, it's still incredibly small odds to have a specific playoff matchup happen if you're only looking for two teams. But anyway, enough of my rambling. I want to get to this and talk about my ACC record predictions, including bowl games, including college football playoff games. So let's kick it off. And here on your screen, you see ACC record predictions plus Notre Dame record predictions for all 18 teams in the discussion. Let's talk about Notre Dame first, since they're kind of the odd man out here. They're not actually in the ACC, but they are affiliated with the conference. I am picking Notre Dame to go 9-3 in the regular season, and I am picking them to win their bowl game, so go to 10-3 over Ole Miss. I'm having them play Ole Miss in the Duke's Mayo Bowl. Now, you may say, well, that's an insane prediction, and maybe it is. But a lot of these ACC schedules are weak. I have a lot of ACC teams going 10-2 in the regular season because I think some of these teams are stronger, much stronger than other teams that reside in their conference. I view the ACC in terms of hierarchy structure similarly to the Big Ten, where you have, clear top teams, some teams below the top in kind of a Tier 1B, Tier 2 situation that can contend for the playoffs and contend for being an ACC champion. Then after that, you kind of have a steep drop-off and Tier 3, and then you have, Tier 4, Tier 5, however much longer you want to drag out that, type of tier list. You have a strict hierarchy in the ACC. I mean, Clemson and Miami and a little bit of Georgia Tech are the overwhelming favorites to win the ACC. SMU and Louisville are in there, Duke and Florida State, but Clemson and Miami lead everyone by a mile, and we'll get to that. Notre Dame is tied in with the ACC when it comes to bowl bids, so I have them getting bowl bids behind the 3 10-2 ACC teams I'm projecting. So even though Notre Dame more like deserves to be in a, Citrus Bowl or Holiday Bowl or Pop-Tarts Bowl, and maybe they will end up being there. Maybe. But for right now, I'm picking them with a 9-3 record and with a tough schedule, but a schedule that with a 9-3 record is not going to get you a lot of favors. I think Notre Dame won't make the playoffs if they go 9-3, unlike some of these other Big Ten or SEC schools who could be in that conversation at 9-3 for an at-large. I don't think Notre Dame would be. Notre Dame, I have them losing to Miami. I have them losing to Texas A&M. And I also have them losing to USC. I have them beating everyone else, I think with maybe the exception of 1 or 2 teams here and there, pretty convincingly. And I think those 3 losses will be respectable or close. So I have them beating Purdue, Arkansas, Boise State, NC State, and then winning all their November games at Boston College, Navy, at Pittsburgh, Syracuse, and at Stanford. And again, beating Ole Miss in the Duke's Mayo Bowl. They're replacing a lot, and they get hit with a 2-game stretch in the first 3 weeks that I just think is very tough. A&M is more experienced than they are. Miami is more experienced than they are. It's going to be tough. Breaking in a new quarterback against Miami and also against Texas A&M. So that's why I have them dropping those games. Moving on to the actual ACC teams, got Wake Forest and Stanford tied for 16th. Stanford 2-10, 0-8. Wake Forest 3-9, 0-8. Stanford fired their head coach, Troy Taylor, due to off-field issues. You can look those up if you haven't already, but I assume us college football fans know about that. Wake Forest, Dave Clawson retired, and they hired Jake Dickert. Fun fact, they have Scotty Hazelton as their defensive coordinator. I just mentioned that because I've covered Michigan State before with, Mel Tucker's staff. And yeah, just not exactly fun times was the Michigan State defense under Scotty Hazelton. I think that Wake Forest and Stanford have a lot of barrenness on their roster. Notre Dame, by the way, there's a lot I love about Notre Dame's roster, and I could see Notre Dame winning the title just to talk about them a little bit more. I just don't think they will. I kind of think 2026 is their year. I still don't think they have that top 5 caliber talent to just immediately reload, especially given the style that they won last year. Lots of forced turnovers, lots of high efficiency, and a lot of, points per play, despite not gaining a lot of yards or necessarily, shutting down every opponent they faced on offense in terms of yards or points. Look at USC, look at Ohio State. I think there's a little bit of a regression to the mean when you look at Notre Dame. Also, losing to 2 Group of 5 schools, it's kind of my thing with like Ryan Day and Ohio State. Like, yes, Notre Dame and Ohio State overachieved relative to their regular season, but their postseason run does not entirely wash away the regular season. It does in a lot of ways, but the fact that they lost, those games, Ohio State to Michigan, and more importantly, Notre Dame to NIU, means there are some inherent issues with the roster and maybe even the staff that are going to take time to clean up. Or if it's with the staff, maybe it's just a feature of the staff and not a bug. Moving on to teams that actually win an ACC game from my predictions, we have Cal at 15th. Not going to spend much time on Cal, and as for Stanford and Wake Forest, I'm not even going to bother talking about who they beat. It's all G5 schools in the non-conference, and then they lose to any Power 4 school in the non-conference, and definitely lose all their ACC games. I have California beating Stanford off of their Week 12 bye in Week 13, but I have them losing to Minnesota and every other ACC opponent. They just got raided in the spring portal window. I kind of feel bad for Devin Brown transferring there. It looked like he had a ton of offensive weapons, and then they all left. I have Virginia Tech and Boston College tied for 13th, both going 2-6 in ACC play. Virginia Tech, I have beating Wake Forest in California in addition to Old Dominion and Wofford. I have them losing to South Carolina, Vanderbilt, NC State, Georgia Tech, Louisville, Florida State, Miami, and at Virginia. I almost picked Virginia Tech to go to the ACC championship game last year. I am glad I backed out of that because that staff did not do a good job managing the talent. They got rated a bit in the portal. They don't return a lot. I don't have a lot of all ACC players for Virginia Tech. I don't. And neither for Boston College, although I think Boston College will be a better team than Virginia Tech, certainly in terms of coaching and game management. I have them beating Fordham, Stanford, California, and UConn, but losing to Michigan State, Pittsburgh, Clemson, Louisville, Notre Dame, SMU, Georgia Tech, and Syracuse on the road. NC State. I have NC State going 6-6, 3-5. They are 12th in my ACC standings predictions. I have them beating East Carolina, Virginia, which is classified as a non-conference game, at Wake Forest, at Duke. I have them dropping that game. I have them beating Virginia Tech, Campbell, and then North Carolina at the end of the year to reach bowl eligibility. I have them losing to, in addition to Duke, Notre Dame, Pittsburgh, Georgia Tech, Miami, and Florida State. In their postseason game, I have NC State matching up against Cincinnati and losing that game, going 6-7, 3-5. Virginia, Pittsburgh, and Syracuse are tied at 4-4 in ACC play, all tied in 9th place. Virginia, I think, will break through because their schedule is easy, and I like the offensive line that they have built. Noah Jose or Josie, correct me if I'm mispronouncing the last name, Brady Wilson, you have Mikhail Boley. There's a lot of good players on Virginia's offensive line, and they also brought in some, good transfers like Mitchell Melton, for example. So I like where Virginia is at in terms of just trying to reach a bowl game or maybe go a game above that. I have them beating Coastal Carolina, William and Mary, Stanford, Washington State, California, Wake Forest, and Virginia Tech, losing to NC State, Florida State, Louisville on the road, North Carolina on the road, and also Duke on the road. This is going to be a very up and down team who I think will perform much better at home than on the road, in part due to their limitations in talent. I have them facing off against South Carolina in the Birmingham Bowl and losing that game pretty convincingly. Pittsburgh, I almost picked as a sleeper, but then I reminded myself that their quality of team last year was pretty putrid by the end. And I'm not exactly someone who's extremely high in Eli Holstein, although I think he does have some talent. They do have some good players on the O-line. I think they have the 2 best linebackers in the ACC in Kyle Lewis and Rasheem Biles. But I I don't think they're better than, say, Louisville, Georgia Tech, Miami, or Notre Dame, all of whom are on their schedule. And Pitt's due to losing a game that doesn't really make sense, whether at home or on the road every year. I have them losing to beating Duquesne, Central Michigan, West Virginia, Boston College, Florida State, NC State, and Stanford, losing to Louisville, Syracuse, Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, and Miami. So I actually have them starting off 7-2 and then finishing 7-5. So kind of having a late season collapse again. Not to the same extreme, and I think they will be a better team this year than they were last year. And I have them matching up in their bowl game against an American team in the Fenway Bowl, and probably winning that game. Although, given last year's loss to Toledo, nothing's guaranteed. Syracuse, I have them going bowling despite one of the toughest schedules in America, and definitely the toughest in the ACC. 7-6, 4-4. I actually have them beating an SEC team. LSU is who I have Syracuse beating in the Gasparilla Bowl. I have them winning that game because I think Brian Kelly will be fired. LSU will suffer a bunch of opt-outs, and because Syracuse, I assume at that point, will still have Fran Brown as their coach, I think that they'll just have more fight in a bowl game that just doesn't mean what bowl games used to. So you're not going to see equal effort, unfortunately. That's why I have Syracuse winning that game. Besides winning their bowl game, I have them winning, obviously, 6 games, losing 6 games. I have them losing to Tennessee, Clemson, SMU, Georgia Tech, Miami, and Notre Dame. But I have them beating UConn, Colgate, Duke, Pittsburgh, North Carolina, and Boston College. I actually don't have them losing a game in the Dome, but I have them losing all of their road games. So I do think this team will be a little bit Jekyll and Hyde depending on where they play. Given the travel, the location, and just the environment, I think that stadium is a kind of weird, scary place to play, especially with a head coach like Fran Brown, who I think is a fiery individual, and I really like him as a head coach. Tied for 6th, we have North Carolina, Duke, and Florida State, all with 5 wins in the ACC and 3 losses. North Carolina benefits from an easy schedule. I like their roster composition enough to pick them to have a winning record in ACC games. I have them losing to TCU, Clemson, Syracuse, and NC State, but beating Charlotte, Richmond, UCF, California, Virginia, Stanford, Wake Forest, and Duke. Easy, easy, easy schedule for Bill Belichick. And I have the North Carolina Tar Heels playing in the Military Bowl and probably beating that opponent. Maybe Bill Belichick goes off to the NFL after a year. I think it will probably take more than a year for him to, rehabilitate his image and get back into the NFL, if that's what he wants to do. I say that just given he's interviewed for NFL coaching positions before, and different teams chose different people to lead their organization than Belichick. And Belichick's old. He is. And he didn't exactly have a, hot finish to his career after Tom Brady left in New England. So I think North Carolina is a good position for him to settle down, rehabilitate his image, and if he is still the, football genius and has the high football acumen that many think he does, and personally I think he does, then he should be able to dominate within 2 to 3 years. Not the ACC, because Clemson and Miami exist, but be able to dominate probably everyone else and be in that college football playoff and ACC champions conversation every year. I have Duke also going 9-4 and 5-3. I really, really like Duke. So on Michigan podcast, Steve Dace was discussing how he thinks that Duke could represent the ACC along with Clemson in the ACC championship game. And I thought that was a little bit bold, but then I remembered that I like Darian Mensah. I like their offensive line. I love the receivers they have. I love the addition of Andrell Anthony along with them returning Quayshawn Brown. And they have a lot of good players on defense, especially at edge and at DB. And they have good lines of scrimmage overall at D tackle as well. And their schedule, it's doable, guys. You play Elon week 1, Illinois week 2 at home, Tulane on the road week 3. Probably a tough non-conference schedule, but all those games are winnable. And I have Duke going 2-1 there, beating Elon and Tulane, losing to Illinois. I also have them in ACC play, beating NC State, California, Georgia Tech, Virginia, Wake Forest, also beating non-con opponent UConn. I have them losing, in addition to Illinois, Syracuse, North Carolina, and Clemson, and they could probably win all of those games except for Clemson. And then again, you never know. They get Clemson off a bye. Clemson also gets them off a bye. But we've seen Clemson struggle before against these teams, such as last year, Louisville, Georgia, Texas, teams that had good line of scrimmage play, and then teams with good QBs. All those teams had them, and then South Carolina had a great QB in Sellers that helped them win. Duke checks those boxes. So Duke can probably beat anyone on their schedule. They won't beat everyone on their schedule, but they can beat, I would say, anyone. They certainly have a puncher's chance in all 12 of their games, and some of them are automatic wins. Like Elon, probably UConn, come on. With the talent they have, it's a guaranteed win. I have them playing one of the ex-Pac-12 teams in the Sun Bowl, probably Oregon State or Washington State, whoever goes bowling there, and I would have Duke convincingly winning that game to go 9-4. Florida State I have going 7-6, 5-3. Don't know if this will be good enough to keep Mike Norvell's job, but given the buyout and the fact that they finished 7-5 in the regular season, I think he's probably surviving entering 2026, but on an even hotter seat than he's on right now. I have them losing to Alabama and Florida beginning of the year, end of the year pretty handily. And in ACC play, I have them losing to Miami and Clemson handily and having an upset loss to Pittsburgh. I just think Pitt's one of those teams that has some talent here and there to get upset, but then also pull off an upset or two. And then I have Florida State beating East Texas, Kent State, Virginia, Stanford, Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, and NC State. Obviously, not a detailed analysis of Florida State, who is one of those bigger brands and one of those bigger programs, one of the more successful programs ever since the 1990s and the Bobby Bowden era, and they won a title even after he left. But it does feel like they are getting passed by. And I read this statistic today. Very sad statistic. Apparently, this is crazy. Apparently, not a single player recruited out of high school by Mike Norvell has been drafted. This is since 2020. Since the 2020 recruiting class. All the players they have, this is from Brad Powers, by the way, all the players they have recruited out of high school in the Mike Norvell era have went undrafted. All the players on their roster who have been drafted came from where? The transfer portal. So, what a wonderful job by Dabo Swinney to age gracefully in that regard. I still think he hasn't used the portal enough, but, you know, he's in a better position right now than Mike Norvell is at Florida State. And what an absolute act of self-vomiting for Florida State to go from, 13-1 to 2-10. That was so bad. I have them losing, by the way, in their bowl game to Minnesota. Yes, you heard that right. Because P.J. Fleck wins his bowl games. P.J. Fleck knows how to build a program. I don't think Norvell does. So therefore, in the Pinstripe Bowl, Minnesota will beat Florida State. Imagine telling a Florida State fan that after the 2013 national championship when they beat Auburn within 30 seconds of the game ending. Now, tied for third, we have Louisville, SMU, and Georgia Tech. All of these teams can reach the playoffs or play in the ACC championship game. Any of these teams. I would give Georgia Tech the best odds out of all of them to reach the playoffs because their schedule has Colorado and Georgia in the non-con. So that does mean their record could be worse because their schedule's tougher. It also means if they achieve the same record as SMU or Louisville, they will have a stronger strength of record. I have Louisville losing to Clemson and SMU, but beating everyone else in their non-con, including Kentucky and Pittsburgh, Virginia, Miami, Boston College, Virginia Tech, and California in conference. I think Miller Moss is going to fit with Jeff Brom like a glove. I think that Isaac Brown and Duke Watson could be the best running back duo in the ACC in the nation, and I love some players they have on defense and their wide receivers. For SMU, I have them beating Baylor and TCU in the non-con in addition to, two other FCS or recent FCS schools. And then I have them beating Syracuse, Stanford, Wake Forest, Boston College, Louisville, and California, winning 10 games, but losing to the two biggest teams on their schedule, Clemson and Miami. SMU I like because I think Kevin Jennings is a top 4 quarterback in the ACC, and I love their trench play. I think that they have good tackles, good enough interior offensive linemen, the best tight end duo in perhaps the nation, but definitely the ACC. And I love what they have in the defensive line. I think they're deep there. And they also have, similar to how Pitt has the two best linebackers in the ACC, SMU has two top three safeties, Isaac Nwokobia and Ahmad Moses. And both of them are only behind Duke's Terry Moore, who I have as the best safety in the ACC. I also like SMU's coaching staff, and as a sneak peek, I think they are going to be one of the better programs in the nation and one of the best in the ACC in the next 5-10 years, because they have deep pockets, and I think it's going to take a while for these NIL rules to resolve themselves, and Lashley's a great coach, and him and his staff will only get better from here on out. JT Sports, friend of the channel, and Bald Father Betts, another friend of the channel, are two people who have been telling me about SMU and this program that they could be building in terms of leveling up. And I'm buying into it, and I think you should too. For Georgia Tech, I have them losing to Clemson by probably anywhere from 1 to 3 points, and then losing to Duke in similar fashion. I have them beating Colorado, Gardner-Webb, Temple, Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, Syracuse, NC State, Boston College, Pittsburgh, and Georgia. Yes, neutral field, they're going to beat Georgia. All because of Haynes King, Jamal Hayes, their offensive line, and then besides Clemson, they have the best defensive tackle group, or at least starting offensive tackle group in the ACC. Don't exactly know how their depth is behind Akello Stone and Jordan Vandenberg, but I love what they have in the trenches. I have Louisville losing to Auburn in their postseason appearance in the Gator Bowl. I have SMU losing to Washington in the Holiday Bowl, and Georgia Tech beating Kansas State in the Pop-Tarts Bowl, just for context. So that explains the 10-3 for SMU and Louisville, and the 11-2 for Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech, I had it coming down to them and the fourth or fifth best SEC or Big Ten team. For the Big Ten, that was Michigan, and for the SEC, it was Alabama. I think that as long as Michigan or Alabama go 10-2 regular season, they would get in over Georgia Tech, even if Georgia Tech has a better win than they do. And I think beating Georgia neutral field would be more impressive than my projected Michigan win over Ohio State, or Alabama's next best win, which would probably be against Tennessee or Oklahoma at home. The fact they just play in an ACC schedule just kicks them in the jewels when it comes to competing for like a final playoff spot. I think that if Georgia Tech wants a guarantee to get into the college football playoffs, 10-2 helps, but what would help even more so is reaching the ACC championship game and, boosting your strength of schedule. Because I think Georgia Tech, I have them being snubbed in comparison to, again, my projected final team in who's not an auto bid is Michigan, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly. And my playoff predictions will be released soon. Hit the notification bell if you want to get notified for those. But with the current record predictions I have, I think Georgia Tech would deserve it over Michigan. I just picked Michigan to make it because they're a bigger brand. We've seen this play out before. And more importantly than that, they're a bigger brand, so that fits the 2023 college football playoff decision. They'll have more talent than Georgia Tech, which also fits 2023. And I have Michigan playing in Indy, just because I think their schedule really works to their favor. They'll lose there, but the committee has shown in the past, in 2022, and last season as well, that losing in your conference championship game, as long as it's not a blowout, or if you're in the SEC or Big Ten, it probably can be a decisive defeat. It doesn't affect the playoff committee's decision that much. So that's why I don't have Georgia Tech reaching the college football playoff, even though I think with that 10-2, they'd certainly deserve it. And then I have Miami and Clemson as the ACC's two playoff participants. It'll be a stronger ACC playoff field than last season, where the ACC went a combined 0-2. I have them going a combined 2-2 this time, and that's with Clemson even earning a first-round bye. So that means an ACC team is reaching the semifinals, and that means at least both of them are reaching the quarterfinals. I have Miami going 12-3 overall, 7-1 in ACC play, 11-1 in the regular season, and I have Clemson going undefeated in the regular season with an 8-0 conference record. Between Florida, Notre Dame, and SMU, and part of me considered Pittsburgh because it's late in the year, it's a back-to-back road game after Virginia Tech, and Cristobal just loses those random games. But I think Miami's just too talented to lose to Pitt, especially after Pitt has a previous 2-game schedule of Notre Dame and at Georgia Tech. I think that'll wear them down. So it really became SMU, Louisville, Florida, and Notre Dame. Which team is Cristobal losing to? Because he's going to lose one of them. SMU, Louisville, and Notre Dame are all well coached. Florida is not. Florida will have the best quarterback of the bunch and maybe the best trench play. At the time that Miami plays those teams, Florida might be the most talented. But I just thought to myself that not too many coaches are worse in-game coaches than Cristobal, and Napier's one of them. So then I removed that from the list. It could be possible. I just decided to not pick that one. I think Notre Dame's in a tough spot traveling to Miami in week 1, especially if Beck's healthy, so I crossed that one off. It came down to Louisville and SMU. Cristobal typically loses these games, I think, a little bit later in the year after a few games, and the team just can no longer maintain the same energy game through game. That's hard for any team in college football. I chose Louisville off the bye. I think that maybe Miami could come off the bye sleepily. Braum is a way better in-game manager, game planner than Cristobal is, and it's perfect. I think that Miami does have some issues in terms of depth at D-tackle that just based on scheme and players, I think that Florida and Louisville would best exploit. Notre Dame could as well, but Notre Dame's scheme under Denbrock's been more off-tackle, and Miami has excellent defensive ends. So I just chose Louisville there. I think they lose to Louisville, but beat Notre Dame, Bethune-Cookman, USF, Florida, Florida State, Stanford, SMU, Syracuse, NC State, Virginia Tech, and Pittsburgh. I have them losing to Clemson in the ACC championship game, though. I think Miami is a good matchup against Clemson because I think there is a good chance, depending on how that Miami D-tackle situation pans out, I could be wrong that they're a little thin there. But if I am wrong, I think that Miami could have a trench edge because I think Miami has a deeper O-line and probably a more talented offensive line and definitely a better running back room. But Clemson's just so much more talented on the outside, and Sweeney's a better game manager, I think, than Cristobal. So I had to give Miami that ACC championship game win. Clemson I have beating LSU, Troy, Georgia Tech, Syracuse, North Carolina, Boston College, SMU, Duke, Florida State, Louisville, Furman, and South Carolina. Also beating Miami. In the college football playoffs, I have Miami as the 5th seed, so they'll host Boise State, the 12th seed. I think win that game pretty decisively before moving on to the Cotton Bowl to play 4th seed Texas. And I think Texas, even with all they lose on the O-line and all they lose in general, their returning production's low 50s, Miami's the high 50s. Texas is much more talented than Miami. They have a much better coaching staff. Texas can do everything Miami wants to do and more, but better. That's a bad matchup, and that could get ugly. So I'm definitely pegging that as a loss. 1-1 record for the Hurricanes in the college football playoffs. I have Clemson getting a first-round bye. They will open up the Orange Bowl playing the winner of the first-round game between the 7 and 10 seed. I have Oregon as the 7 seed and winning that game. And I debated this one. I think that Oregon is going to be this team that, like Ohio State, is going to get hot. They're going to start the year very shaky, and some will even... I think both of those teams will undergo the 2023 Alabama experience early in the year, where you kind of freak out about where they are in September, but then in October you think, okay, they're getting better. And then in November you think to yourself, I would prefer to not see these teams in the playoff. I think unless you're one of the 2 best teams in America. And while Clemson is close, I don't think Clemson has quite the talent Texas does anymore. They're close, and they're within margin of error to actually be more talented than Texas. I could be wrong there, but I just don't think they are. And then I think Penn State's staff is way better than Clemson's, and Penn State doesn't return as much, but they have a similar age and seasoning to them. And I think that, look, Clemson's done a worse job at Penn State recently of competing in the big games even winning the big games and even winning the small games you should win. So Clemson's in that zone where you may not want to face an Oregon or an Ohio State, but you may be good enough to, even when they're peaking, still, beat them or be the better team. I sided with the latter because Oregon has questions on defense that I don't know if they've addressed. Clemson did address their questions on defense. They brought in Tom Allen, who I think, while not an elite DC, is good or great, and that's way better than Wes Goodwin. I mean, with the talent they have in the D-line and corner and linebacker and safety as well, I mean, safety's their worst room on defense, and I think their safeties are great, future NFL players there. That defense by the end of the year is going to be mean for Clemson, if not at the beginning of the year too, and that offense could be the best. So I have them beating Oregon in the Orange Bowl, and then I have them losing to Georgia in the Fiesta Bowl. I think that Clemson will be better than Georgia. I do. I straight up think they will be better, which is a stark contrast to last season. However, I still think Georgia is physically tougher. I would have to look this up, so don't quote me on this, but intuitively I feel like Georgia's bigger, and Georgia's out-recruited Clemson for the previous 5 years, and their coaching staff's better. So I think in that game, you're probably going to see Clemson come out with an early lead and get Georgia's defense on their toes a bit, because Clemson's outside talent's way better than Georgia's this year. But I also think that Georgia's inside talent and trench talent is good enough, and they're deeper than Clemson overall as a roster, to where as the game goes on and adjustments have to be made, I think it'll look a lot like the Orange Bowl last year, where Penn State, in my mind, was clearly the more talented team, but Notre Dame stayed in. Penn State didn't expect that, and eventually things began to break down. I think that's what'll happen to Clemson in that Fiesta Bowl, and they'll lose to Georgia there, but still reach the semifinals and still earn a 14-1, 8-0 record, their best since 2019, when they also went 14-1, 8-0 in ACC play, won the conference, although they made the national championship because the playoff format was different then. Some final things before we end this segment. Clemson will compete for a natty. Obviously, we just talked about that. I think Miami breaks through under Cristobal, and I think in the future it'll only continue. Miami is not where they can be and not where they want to be under Cristobal. They've consistently recruited top 15, top 10, even brought in a top 5 class entering 2024. I love their outlook in the future. I absolutely love it. And I think he made staff upgrades. I think every year under Cristobal, their staff gets better or stays the same, and that's a good sign. Some other college football playoff contenders, obviously Notre Dame. It's a bold prediction that I'm leaving Notre Dame out of the playoffs. I'm very well aware of that. That's very bold. I think Georgia Tech and SMU are very serious playoff contenders. Them having tougher out-of-conference schedules than Louisville, and I think being better in the trenches than Louisville certainly helps. Louisville, though, is a definite dark horse. Same with Duke. And then I have Tech, SMU, and Louisville reaching high-tier bowl games. Duke, FSU, UNC, Pitt, UVA, and NC State. I'm having them play it in lower-caliber bowl games. That is my ACC plus Notre Dame regular season and postseason prediction segment. Thank you so much for tuning in to this. That's how I think the ACC will shake out. I think Miami and Clemson are at the top. Georgia Tech is following them closely behind, along with SMU a little bit, and Louisville. It's a shame looking at Notre Dame's schedule. This is what I want to close out on. When I look at Notre Dame's schedule, I think it's a shame that they play Miami, but they don't play SMU, they don't play Georgia Tech, they don't play Louisville, and they don't play Clemson. So in my mind, and I'm actually pretty much in chalk in terms of odds for the ACC. Some other things, no, like the amount of games I think the top teams will win. I think I'm a little higher there in terms of win totals for the top teams. And then obviously, if you count Notre Dame in the ACC mix, I'm not in line with chalk at all there. Although Vegas is picking them to go 10-2, not 11-1 by the preseason win total. But from my perspective, Notre Dame's missing a lot of that top tier ACC talent. They do play A&M, and they do play Miami and USC. Those are their biggest games. And Miami's a top ACC team, but I wish that they played more because Notre Dame's a benchmark program. I know I'm picking them to miss the playoffs, but under Freeman, they have good enough coaches and elite enough recruiting, and Freeman is improving so rapidly at different points to where I think they are a benchmark program for a lot of ACC teams who have to play them, because Notre Dame has to have a set amount of ACC games they play. I believe 4 of them, and they can schedule even more if they want. And Notre Dame could be a benchmark program, a benchmark matchup for any team they play outside of, maybe the obvious big dogs of the sport, like Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama. Now I think you got to include Texas and Oregon in that mix. But to anyone else, they're the ultimate test in my mind, because of what they did last year, because of what they've done under Freeman, and in the 2020s, beating Clemson when Clemson was ranked number 1 in 2020, for example. It's a shame they don't play more of the top-end ACC teams, in my opinion. And now we can move on and do my some ACC record predictions, get into previewing some games, of course. I am going to quickly go to the bathroom, and then I will be right back. This is a great opportunity while I am taking that brief break. Great opportunity to subscribe to the channel, like the video, be active in the live chat, and comment your thoughts down below. And also send in a super chat, and that way when I come back, I can see it and reply to whatever you want to tell me, or if you just want to give support. Thank you so much, and just give me a few minutes. I'll be right back. And welcome back. Thank you for your patience. I really appreciate it. Okay, so let's get back to this and talk about Clemson. My Clemson Tigers 2025 record prediction. For those of you who are live, you already know what that is. Probably should have saved the ACC predictions until after these segments, but oh well, this will be more of a deeper dive into it. Is Clemson the ACC's number one program? I think that's a key question entering 2025 and beyond. Clemson is returning 80% of their production. This is a program under Dabo Swinney that has played in 3 national championship games, actually 4 of them. 4 of them. Don't bust me on that. 4 of them. Won 2 national championships. Beat Alabama twice under Nick Saban in what many would consider as prime in both of those games. And when I look at the Tigers, I think to myself that this is a team that should win it all. They should compete for the national championship. And if they don't, their fans should be sorely disappointed. I mean, look at what they bring back here. Let's talk about their roster and then also talk about the schedule for Clemson here. So Clemson returns Cade Klubnik, who I have as my best overall quarterback in America, not just the ACC. So he's an All-American in my book and on my All-ACC team. My All-American and All-Conference teams are larger than most, so if you feel like I'm overrepresenting Clemson here, I'm not. There are just more teams and more spots per team. But I have, in addition to Cade Klubnik, Gideon Davidson, true freshman running back, who I think will be good, honorable mention, good. Ryan Lithencum at center, Harris Sewell at guard, Blake Miller and Tristan Lay at tackle. I have the top 3 receivers in the ACC going to Clemson. TJ Moore, Bryant Wesco Jr., and Antonio Williams. And I also have Olsen Pat Henry representing the Clemson offense on the All-ACC team at tight end. Peter Woods, DeMonte Capehart are there, along with Stephen Green. Also Will Helt and TJ Parker at edge. I have Wade Woodaz and Sammy Brown at linebacker. Ricardo Jones and Khalil Barnes at safety. And then Avion Terrell, Ashton Hampton, and Jaden Lucas at corner. Also want to shout out Nolan Hauser at kicker, who's on the All-ACC team. I mean, this is a loaded group. They're experienced, they're talented. They upgraded their coaching staff, replacing Wes Goodwin, who was just absolutely awful in his tenure as Clemson's DC, replacing him with Tom Allen, who I think will simplify things a little bit more, will have much better situational awareness, is older, is a vet. He wants to be in South Carolina to be closer to his family, so he's a long-term option that players know is going to be stable and will be there as long as he performs at a high level. I think Allen's a good, great defensive coordinator. I really do. Not quite, Brent Venables, but much, much better than Wes Goodwin. I lean positive with Clemson on everything except the run game. And I don't really lean negative in the run game. I just think it's a neutral. It's something that they'll figure out because their offensive coordinator, Garrett Riley, is one of the best in the business, could be the best in the business there, and their O-line is good. Guard, I think, is good, maybe not great, but center and tackle, I think, certainly can contend for some of the best in the nation. I love this roster. I think what holds them back with the talent they have and the age they have, at this point it's going to be the staff. The staff is what will hold them back, if anything else. It's the same thing with Penn State. I've talked about before in 2 different videos that I think both Penn State and Clemson have a national title or bust year this season, which means someone is going to come away with a sour taste in their mouth. Unless both play each other in the national championship, which under the current format, the odds of that happening are very slim to pick a specific matchup and predict that. And I'm actually not predicting that matchup, just for starters, just as a public service announcement, I guess. So when I observe the Tigers, I think that one of them or the Nittany Lions is going to come away empty-handed and having a bad taste in their mouth. I think that big games has been an issue with Dabo Swinney recently, but having the seniority and the size and the athleticism coming back they do, and the amount of NFL talent could rectify that. We'll just have to see. I think that with their schedule, they could go 12-0. They could also go 10-2. If everything goes wrong, maybe 9-3, but I don't think they're going worse than that. So they'll have an identical record or better record than what they had last season. They're minus 160 to go to the playoffs, plus 110 to win the ACC, somewhere around there. Win total right now, over under 9.5. I think that their strength of schedule, there's some oomph to it, but it's ranked 40th per FPI. Their toughest games are LSU, SMU at Louisville, and at South Carolina. The fact that two of their toughest games are in the non-conference against the SEC, against two teams that aren't Georgia or Texas or Alabama, if you want to add in a third, that's why their strength of schedule is ranked a little bit lower. They are first in returning production at 80%, and they have a preseason S&P Plus rating of a 23.3, which means they're viewed as 23.3 points superior to the average college football team per Bill Connolly. 8th again. And they were not ranked all that highly last season in S&P Plus or even in FPI. So if they are simply more efficient than they were last year, combined with their returning production, they could easily be in the top 5, if not the number 1 team in the country. And while I don't think they'll be the number 1 team in the country, I think they'll certainly be close. And they may be ranked there at the end of the year. I think that this schedule gives them the perfect opportunity to go undefeated in the regular season, and that's what I'm picking them to do. 13-0, 8-0 in ACC play. I have them winning the ACC over Miami, so Miami will be the ACC runner-up. Clemson will be the champions. They'll get a first-round bye for sure with this record, if not the number 1 overall seed, and they'll be a college football playoff participant. Who's better at quarterback than Clemson on the schedule? I think the only team who could be that is South Carolina and Lenora Sellers. And Lenora Sellers does not have Clemson's O-line, does not have their D-line. They have Dylan Stewart, who's pretty good, but Clemson has someone named TJ Parker there who may be just as good. And South Carolina doesn't have a Peter Woods. They don't have anyone at wide receiver that's close to TJ Moore, Bryant Wesco Jr., and Antonio Williams. They don't have the O-line Clemson does. They don't have the staff that Clemson does. They just don't. It's not a... It's kind of funny because South Carolina under Beamer has not defeated Dabo Swinney in their own stadium, but then they have no problem going into Death Valley and winning under Beamer. And that's not because, even odd curse. That's way too simplistic and stupid. It's because the years that Clemson travels to South Carolina is typically after South Carolina loses a lot, or when they have certain roster busts, or they just don't field as many good. They don't field the same teams, as good of teams in so far under Beamer in the odd years as they do the even years. Now, that's way too simplistic to chalk it up to an odd year versus an even year. It's cycles. College football is a cyclical sport, unless you are a Texas, Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, and now maybe Oregon too. Outside of that, it's more of a cyclical sport, and that's how it's always been outside of, anywhere from 1 team to maybe 5 teams at the best, or, maybe some, in some time frames more, but you get the point. You get the point. South Carolina is a cyclical program. Clemson is much closer to a lock-in and reload program than South Carolina is, and they're bringing everyone back, and South Carolina's losing a lot. It's the only school I think was a better QB than Clemson this year, or could. I have Klubnik at 1 and Sellers at 2, so it's a very strong chance in my mind that Sellers ends up a better quarterback. But outside of that, there aren't many things that could even go South Carolina's way in a realistic sense. I think that the LSU game is not going to be as challenging as some people think. I think that matchup is a nightmare for LSU and very exciting for Clemson with all the transfers LSU will rely on. Clemson being at home, being more experienced, and them having, I think, a better quarterback in Klubnik, way better than Garrett Nussmeier. But let's get on to some more specific predictions, some more specific ones. I want to discuss a mild prediction, a medium prediction, a hot prediction, a scorching one, and a hellfire one. So it's on a Scoville scale. Mild is an easy prediction. Hellfire is the boldest prediction I have for the team. My mild prediction for Clemson is they will make the college football playoff for the second time in a row, or the second year in a row. Obviously making it from 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 6 years in a row, which is pretty impressive, given it was a 4-team field. Second year in a row, I think it's pretty easy, given they have minus odds to reach the playoffs. Medium prediction is that Clemson goes undefeated in its out-of-conference schedule. I already talked about this. Don't think South Carolina or LSU match up well with them, and you're not losing to Troy or Furman. You're just not. Maybe one of those teams plays you close for a quarter or a half, but you ultimately pull away and win by 40 points. That's how this works. My hot prediction is that Cade Klubnik solidifies himself as the number 1 quarterback in the nation. Now, this is hot because Sellers, Lagway, Sellers and Lagway may have a higher ceiling than Klubnik does, especially in terms of athleticism. Same with Aller. Not the same scrambling ability, but in the size, the height, the arm strength. There's a lot of quarterbacks competing for that number 1 spot. I don't think this is like 2022 where it was between Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud, and I thought it was pretty clear even then that Stroud was the best QB in America. That's not what this is. This is very open for who will be the best quarterback, and usually it always is, but this is even more open than a lot of previous seasons. So that's why it's a hot prediction, but he will be the best quarterback in the nation when it's all said and done. Scorching prediction is that by the end of the season, Clemson will field a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense. This is scorching and not cooler because Clemson's defense, when stopping the run, was so bad last year that I wonder if part of it has to do with the players and not just the defensive coordinator. I think that changing DCs will help a lot, but will this team have the number 1 rushing defense? No, I don't think so. And as for the top 10 offense, we've seen for 2 years at Clemson under Garrett Riley, and I think it's a mild prediction to pick Clemson to have a top 10 offense. But still, in big games, outside of the Texas game last year, and even then it was a little shaky at times, the offense hasn't produced. Like Louisville was bad. Georgia was bad. Scoring 14 points against South Carolina at home was bad. You get the point. So it's scorching because to do both of those is difficult, I think, for anyone to do right now with, the portal, with roster retention. Clemson does a very good job at roster retention, but even they lose some players here and there. And the defense was just so far behind last year to where I wonder if, it'll definitely improve, but maybe it's unlikely for it to be top 5 or top 10. And it's more likely it'll just be top 15 or top 20. Last year, they weren't even top 25 at the end of the year. I mean, the Texas game was very revealing when Texas couldn't run the ball all season long. And then against Clemson, they run it very easily. Just saying. And then I already told you about the 3 games where the offense sucked. So that's why I have it as a scorching prediction. My Hellfire one is that Clemson earns a 13-0 regular season record. That's bold, because it's hard for anyone to go undefeated now with super conferences, and it's not like Clemson has a Syracuse 2024 level schedule. It's a bit tougher than that. And Clemson, even in one of their national championship seasons, has lost a regular season game. Even Nick Saban's Alabama did. I mean, going undefeated with Clemson's recent history since 2021, and with the schedule they have, that is unlikely. So that's why I have that as a hellfire prediction. Ultimately, I think the Clemson Tigers go 13-0, 8-0. They're going to be the best team in the ACC, could be the best team in America, and they will compete for a national championship. Don't exactly know if they win it. Right now, my pick is Penn State, but I could easily see Clemson being in that conversation at the end of the year as the team who is the number 1 in America, is the favorite to win it all per the odds. I'm excited to watch Clemson this year and the storyline that could unfold from the ACC winning its first national championship since 2018. And if anyone's going to do that, I think Miami maybe has some odds to do it, but it will be Clemson. If the ACC is going to win it all this year, my money and your money should be on the Clemson Tigers. Okay, I had a really bad itch for my nose. It went away. I don't know why it even flared up, but that was bad. That really was bad. So yeah, let's see if there's any super chats in here. There are not. So we're going to march on. and we're going to talk about Miami and the Hurricanes and Mario Cristobal. Many have said that Miami essentially wasted their 2024 season. You know, Cam Ward goes round 1, pick 1 in the 2025 NFL draft, and Miami went 10-3 and lost in the Pop-Tarts Bowl because their defense, you know, couldn't stop molasses in December. They couldn't stop a nosebleed. It's just they couldn't crush a grape in a food fight. They couldn't do anything. At the end of the year, it was very clear if you have just an okay passing offense, you can trade blows with this team all day, any day, 24/7. I don't think it was a wasted year, though. I think that there was a lot of wasted opportunity, but it's not like Miami has been recruiting poorly, developing poorly, and that they are this bottom feeder program. I think that, for example, a rival of Miami, a school up the road from Miami in the Panhandle, Florida State, checks a lot of those boxes. Now, I don't think Florida State's a bottom feeder program. Do not misinterpret what I say there. Do not intentionally take context out and act like I said Florida State's a bottom feeder program. They're not. But right now, they're teetering there after their 2-10 season, and they have not developed well, and they hadn't recruited well. So in 2023, that was the all-in year. Now, they won the ACC, and I think they were successful, and I don't think they wasted much that year because you can't control the Travis injury. So they didn't waste as much as Miami did last year, but they were not set up for the same sustained success that I think Miami is right now. Miami recruiting is still leveling up. Their development's still leveling up. They just hired their best defensive coordinator that they've had there in probably over a decade, if not of the 21st century, in Corey Heatherman. It's not saying much because, you know, we know how Randy Shannon turned out. We know how Lance Guidry panned out. We know how Charlie Strong panned out with Miami. Wasn't there for that long. And Kevin Steele. We know that. We know all of these things. Blake Baker, too. So that's not saying a whole lot, per se. However, at the same time, I think that winning 10 games for the first time since 2017 means something. I think that building the program and roster talent and strength and size that Miami is impressive. You know, I like the Carson Beck addition. If he's healthy and they can protect him and they give him better receivers than what Georgia had last year, and I think that's easy to do if you have Miami's talent, and especially factoring in what they did in the portal at wide receiver, I like the addition. I love running back, the offensive line, defensive end, and even the defensive backfield. I don't think Miami lacks talent, certainly not after they brought in their transfers and hired new staffers. I think that alignment has been an issue. And the fact that, of course, game day coaching is not a strength of Cristobal's. I think every Miami fan, even the most positive one, can admit that. Safety, I have some questions with. Same with special teams. But if Bert Auburn ends up, you know, playing to his 2022 and 2023 self, I don't think special teams will be an issue at all. This team can go 12-0. I'm just going to say that right now. They can go undefeated. Now, they also have very low floor to them, depending on how healthy Beck is, his receivers, how engaged he is, how Auburn pans out. There's a lot of boom, but a whole lot of bust with Miami. A lot of that. So they could also go 8-4. And if everything falls apart, I think 7-5 is possible. And 7-5 would get Cristobal on the hot seat for sure. 8-4 would certainly make him feel some heat. This is the 41st toughest schedule per ESPN's FPI. Their toughest games are Notre Dame, Florida, Louisville, at SMU. They return 57% of their production and are 12th in preseason S&P Plus with an 18.8 rating. I have Carson Beck as my third best quarterback in the ACC, only behind Haynes King and Cade Klubnik. He's on my All-ACC team. Mark Fletcher, Jordan Lyle, and Shamar Brown are on my All-ACC team at running back. So they could have the deepest running back room in the ACC, and that's me factoring in Notre Dame too, although I think Notre Dame is better and probably has similar depth, if not deeper, there. But the fact Miami's even in that conversation is impressive. And my All-ACC teams, and same with All-American teams, are larger. There are more teams and more spots per team than most All-Conference and All-American teams, but I like that because there's a lot of good players out there who don't get on the teams, and I think that we have to change that. I think it's our duty as analysts and passionate fans to represent all the good players, to recognize them, not to represent them. Well, maybe in some cases, but to recognize them and their achievements. So even though the ACC teams and SEC Big 12 and Big 10 ones are bigger, that does not mean the talent being represented is diminished. All these players are still good. James Brockermeyer represents Miami at center, same with Inez Cooper and Matthew McCoy at guard, and Francis Mauigoa and Markel Bell at tackle. I have Josiah Trader, C.J. Daniels, Keelan Marione, and Tony Johnson at wide receiver. You don't have an alpha wide receiver one, but you do have a lot of depth there. I have Elijah Lofton at tight end on my All-ACC team, Ruben Bain, Malik Bryant, Armando Blout, and Akeem Mesidor at edge, Justin Scott, David Blay, and Ahmad Moten at D tackle, Raul Aguirre Jr., Wesley Besaint, and Mohamed Touré at linebacker, Jacoby Thomas and Zechariah Poyser at safety, and Charles Brantley, O.J. Frederic, and Xavier Lucas at corner. It's so interesting looking at Miami and Clemson and juxtapositioning them. I think that Miami's outlook is better because I think they've recruited better, and dare I say it, I think they've developed better. I mean, the fact that Miami, under Cristobal, look at the 23 season they had where they beat Clemson head-to-head and then beat A&M, and of course I know Clemson beat Notre Dame that year, but they had similar seasons, despite Miami only being in year 2, Clemson being past year 10 with Sweeney and recruiting much better. And then last year, Miami was power rated ahead of Clemson. And I know Clemson's game against Texas may have been more impressive than any game Miami had all season long, but Miami did not have, I don't want to say they didn't have the same lows because they did lose to Tech and Syracuse, but they also didn't lose to them by double digits, and what they did on offense was very impressive. So on one hand, I think to myself that in parts of their roster, even though they don't return as much as Clemson, they're deeper, but I think Clemson does have a bevy of high-end NFL talent that Miami, because of what they lost and what replaces their losses, doesn't quite have yet. That's why I have them going 11-2, 7-1. They'll be second in the ACC, and they'll be the ACC runner-ups losing to Clemson, but they'll get in the college football playoffs for the first time in school history, and it will be Mario Cristobal's first appearance in the college football playoffs. I have them losing to, in my mind, one of SMU, Louisville, Florida, and Notre Dame. I think that there's going to be a loss mixed in there, and then when they play against Clemson, the path for Miami to win there is to stop the run and run the ball, and then at the same time hope that your secondary is solid enough and healthy enough to where you can stop Klubnik and those receivers. And I just think that's too much to ask of Miami with how much they return relative to how much Clemson returns. All Clemson has to do to win the game is just be able to put pressure on Miami in one area, whether that's you pressure back and you stop him from doing much, because with what Clemson returns on offense and what Miami returns on defense, I don't think they're going to hold Clemson to say under 20 points or maybe even under 30 in this hypothetical matchup. They probably won't hold them under 30. So Miami will have to score and then slow down Clemson from scoring. Clemson's the better team. There is a path for Miami to win, though, and again, long-term, I like Miami more than Clemson just based on Clemson not bringing in a great 2025 recruiting class, and they haven't used the portal much. Miami's a bigger spender, and Miami's a better recruiting program right now than Clemson is. Getting into some more specific predictions, a Scoville scale here. We have a mild pick, a medium pick, a hot pick, a scorching prediction, and a hellfire prediction. All of these are relative to the team I'm talking about, so something that's a hellfire pick from your perspective, or even mine, may not be a hot take, but it's certainly the hottest take I could think of that I have for this team. So mild is that, are you kidding me? This has happened to me again. What? Hold on. This is bad. Are you kidding me? I was getting all into it, and then, boom, I got hit with the, darn it. Okay, I'm going to have to edit that in. Sorry, guys. We're going to have to move on to Notre Dame. So I didn't edit in my Scoville scale predictions properly. I'm going to have to do that later. But we can move on to Notre Dame and then get to some of my early game previews. We can do those for sure after this Notre Dame Fighting Irish record prediction. I will just hard edit in the Miami predictions to this, and my apologies again to you guys on that front. Let's talk about Notre Dame and what I think is in store for the Irish entering 2025. In 2024, Notre Dame shocked the world by losing to NIU, and then after that, not quitting and marching all the way to the national championship game, where they lost to an on-fire Ohio State team by only 11 points. 1 point was 31-7. They mounted a comeback where they scored 16 unanswered points, 2 touchdowns, 2 two-point conversions, showed a lot of fight. Ohio State was just the better team at the end, but there's a lot of promise for Notre Dame entering this season, and I think especially looking beyond that with how they recruit and with how young this team is. When I take a deeper look, I lift up the hood and look at Notre Dame, this is a program that reminds me a lot of the surrounding Midwest schools. So I think that their offensive line reminds me of the old Wisconsin lines. No coincidence that former Wisconsin O-line coach Joe Rudolph is Notre Dame's offensive line coach. I think that what they want to do at quarterback reminds me a little bit of Ohio State, with, Mike Denbrock being one of the best in America, and now they've tried to recruit there and recruit highly there. They care about that quarterback position. At wide receiver, they remind me, in my mind, of Michigan State recently, where State has had some good underrated receivers with athleticism, and they're well coached there. And then I would say in terms of overall mindset of how they want to function, reminds me a lot of Michigan, where you have some explosiveness, you have some NFL guys on the outside, and you have NFL depth, but at the end of the day, you want to bully people. You don't want to just run around people and exhaust them, although that's helpful. You want to bully them, and you want to out-physical them, and you want to play, tough, hard-nosed, hard-hitting defense. And that's what Notre Dame does. And that's why I think that even with all they lose, they're only 61st in returning production, returning 56% of their production from 2024 to 2025, and then they're 5th in S&P Plus preseason with a 26.4 S&P Plus rating. It's why I think even with all they lose, they still have to be put in that national championship contender conversation, and certainly college football playoff conversation. They can go 12-0. I think this team can also go 9-3, maybe even 8-4 if a lot doesn't work out for the Irish, and that's because, looking at their schedule, they have to play, at Miami. They have to play Texas A&M at home, Purdue at home, Arkansas on the road. This is weeks 1. They have a bye in week 2, and then week 3, 4, and 5. That's the A&M, Purdue, and Arkansas run. Boise State they host week 6. NC State week 7's at home. USC at home week 8. They get a bye in week 9. Play at Boston College week 10. Navy they host week 11. Pittsburgh they play at week 12. Syracuse at home, and then they play at Stanford in week 14. Schedule's 38th per FPI. There are plenty of losable games here, especially with some questions at quarterback. Carr's coming off of an injury. I assume he's going to start there, but you never know with, him and Kenny Minchie battling it out there. And they had to go to the portal a little bit for the defensive line, and I think that they lack some depth and lack some size there. But I love their running back, wide receiver, and offensive line groups, and then their defensive backfield and overall depth and culture is really, really admirable. I have Notre Dame kind of classified with the ACC for my predictions. So looking at my All-ACC team, I have CJ Carr representing Notre Dame at quarterback, Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price there, Ashton Craig at center, Billy Scruth, and Charles Jagasaw at guard. It sounds like Jagasaw is going to play, even with his injury, for part of the season. Probably not the whole season, but at least for part of it. Huge unfortunate blow that they lost him. Emil Wagner and Anthony Knapp and Sullivan Absher at tackle. I have Malachi Fields, Jaden Greathouse, and Jordan Faison at wide receiver there. My All-ACC and all-conference teams in general are a little bit larger than many others' teams, but that doesn't mean that I'm listing average players there. Eli Raridon represents Notre Dame at tight end. I have Gabriel Rubio at D tackle, Joshua Burnham, Jordan Bothello, and Junior Tuhalamaka at edge. I have Drake Bowen and Jalen Sneed at linebacker. Luke Talich and Adon Schuler at safety, and Leonard Moore, Devonta Smith, and Christian Gray at corner. This is a loaded roster, and it is a team that has questions, but overall is going to be solid. Nonetheless, I am picking Notre Dame boldly to lose those 3 games and actually to miss the college football playoff. Now, I'm expecting a lot of pushback here, but I think that Miami on the road week 1, that's a challenge for sure, going into an environment with facing off against a team that has a more experienced QB. And then A&M's a lot more experienced than Notre Dame as well. Arkansas on the road is not going to be a joke this early because they're not going to quit yet, and they have a good QB. Boise State's experienced. USC nearly beat Notre Dame last year when they couldn't stop a nosebleed. And USC, while they lose about as much as Notre Dame does, they had a lot going wrong for them last year, and USC had a lot going right for them last year. So regression to the mean says USC and Notre Dame are going to converge, whereas Notre Dame was the better team than USC last year, obviously. Boston College on the road. Should be an easy win, but Boston College has some solid trench players, and there's enough road games and weird spots and then enough big games to where I think that Notre Dame is going to lose some games here, especially since that early part of the schedule, you play 4 Power 4 teams, and 2 of them are preseason top 10. And Arkansas, by the metrics, is top 40. According to FPI, top 25, although I think that's a bunch of crap. And then Boise State is probably a top 30, top 25 caliber team. So if Notre Dame plays down to competition, as they have at points under Freeman, and with the coordinator change, and with the losses up front, injury to Jagasaw, and the loss of depth to the portal at O-line, and then just the loss of all their starters on the D-line, starters in terms of who played the most snaps last year at D-tackle, D-end, etc., I think some losses are due. Now, it's bold. I think Notre Dame's most likely record prediction is probably 10-2 or 9-3. Don't think it's any worse than that. And I think that 12-0 is more likely than 7-5, and 11-1 is more likely than 8-4. I just think that Notre Dame earned a lot of turnovers last year. They lose Xavier Watts, who was, I think, the heartbeat of their defense. I think that Al Golden was super underrated as someone who, for the longest time, didn't believe in him. And therefore, you're going to see regression at multiple points. And instead of being an 11-1 team last year that could have gone 10-2, could have gone 12-0, if all their close games went wrong for them, A&M, NIU, and USC, they could have gone 9-3. I think you're going to see some of that regression there on top of some teams on their schedule improving from where they were last year. Like USC and A&M are familiar opponents for Notre Dame. They played them last year. They play them again this year. Both should be better, if not much better than where they were last year. And Notre Dame, by returning production, should technically be worse. Some predictions specifically for Notre Dame on a Scoville scale, so a mild prediction for Notre Dame, all the way up to a hellfire prediction for Notre Dame. My mild one is that their offensive line's a top 5 O-line in college football. This is even factoring in the Jagasaw injury. He'll probably be back. If not, I trust Joe Rudolph to have a replacement ready for him. My medium prediction is that the Irish field a great wide receiver core, and Malachi Fields gets 1,000 receiving yards, at least, if not more. He's been getting some first-round buzz. I think C.J. Carr or Kenny Minchey will be a better thrower of the football than Riley Leonard was. Maybe not have the same pocket presence, but that will not impact Malachi Fields getting 1,000 receiving yards unless every team they face all year somehow gets pressure on whoever the starting QB is, likely Carr, and I don't think that'll happen with how elite Notre Dame's O-line is. My scorching prediction, well, before we get to that, my hot prediction, is that Notre Dame exits the month of September with a 2-2 record. So they will already be in danger of missing the playoffs at the end of September. You can probably gauge who my predicted losses for Notre Dame are between Miami, A&M, Purdue, and Arkansas, but I'll let you continue to guess. My scorching prediction is that Chris Ash and Notre Dame part ways after the end of the year. I think that was a little bit of a panic move, and I don't think that Notre Dame had, just based off recent history, I don't think they had the budget at DC that Penn State or Ohio State did. So I don't think, therefore, they could get the options that I think would have fit better than Ash. I'm not high on the Ash hire at all, by the way. I'm just not. Like, I think that Ohio State, for example, with Matt Patricia, it's an intriguing hire, and it's one that could work out well, but to deny that that couldn't just blow up in their face is lunacy. I don't think that will. Ash is different because Ash doesn't have the same reputation Patricia does, and Notre Dame does not have the same talent on defense that Ohio State does. So that has an even greater chance of blowing up with Notre Dame and doesn't have the same chances working out that, let's say, Patricia with Ohio State does. So I think that Notre Dame will be in the market for a new DC entering 2026. My Hellfire prediction is that Notre Dame misses the college football playoffs despite being a top 12 caliber team. This is a team that, if we were doing a meritocratic college football playoff, I think would make it based on power ratings. But that's not how it is, and I don't know if that's exactly how it should be in terms of meritocratic power ratings. You should probably have a meritocratic playoff in terms of resume and strength of record, not necessarily how much Vegas thinks you would beat the average team on a neutral field by, if you catch what I'm saying. I'm picking Notre Dame towards the lower end of their spectrum of outcomes, but I'm excited to watch this team, and I do think in 2026 they will return a lot of these young, athletic players, probably upgrade their coaching staff, and make a run at the national championship then. I think this is going to be a down cycle. It's going to be a valley in between two mountains. I think the 24 season, great mountain type season where you reach the peak of what you can do. I think there's going to be some regression, and then in 2026 they're going to shoot to get back towards the mountaintop. Don't know if they'll finish on top of it, but I think they'll be in better contention to do so. Okay, now we can talk about some early predictions for different college football games. Almost said college football playoff. Man, I'm tired. I am never, ever working out or running before a show again. That was a mistake. That was a grave, grave mistake. Very grave mistake. But let's do this because we can and because we should, and then we'll get on out of here. So looking at Michigan and Oklahoma, this is going to be the first game I want to discuss, and then we have Notre Dame, Miami on the chopping block, and also Texas and Ohio State. Michigan travels to Oklahoma in week 2. It's going to be a night game. Kickoff is at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time in Gaylord Family Memorial Stadium, Oklahoma's home field. The current spread right now per FanDuel is Oklahoma -2.5. This is a game that can decide between these two teams who goes to the college football playoff and who doesn't. And more broadly, will the SEC or the Big Ten get more benefit of the doubt when it comes to how many teams they will have selected for the 2025-2026 college football playoff? That's what I think is interesting here when observing the Wolverines and the Sooners, and the fact that both of these teams last year were similar to each other in a lot of ways, were they not? Struggles on offense, awesome defenses, had very tough schedules. Oklahoma's was tougher than Michigan's. And yet in November, they had some big wins. I mean, both beat Alabama, for example, in very similar ways, winning the turnover battle, getting enough offense to put some pressure on Alabama, and then shutting down Alabama's defense. And then Michigan obviously beat Ohio State. So I want to talk about these two teams a little bit, brush up on them, and then discuss just, I think, what is the key matchup. The questions for both of these teams really revolve around the offense, especially the QB position. Notice for Michigan, I think one of their top two questions is how elite can Underwood be in year one? For Oklahoma, one of theirs is how does John Mateer adjust to the SEC? Basically, it's the same question. Can Underwood face Big Ten defenses and shred them? And it's the same thing for John Mateer, or to what degree can they shred the defenses they're going to play? For Oklahoma, there's a question of whether the O-line is fixed. Michigan's O-line was not the best last year, but it was not nearly as atrocious as Oklahoma's was. Where Michigan was worse than Oklahoma was unironically quarterback play. Even though Arnold was horrible, Davis Warren was certainly less talented, and Oklahoma was better in the secondary than Michigan was. Michigan also lost more to the NFL draft than Oklahoma did, although Michigan, to be fair, has also gained on Oklahoma in terms of talent, bringing in a better recruiting class. Michigan, the question for them outside of Underwood is who are the new freaks? Who are the new guys who could be first-rounders or at least day two guys? Because they lost a lot of first-round talent, a lot of impactful talent. I'm concerned with Michigan at offensive tackle and team soundness, so game management, game planning, really relating to their staff, and I also don't like them at wide receiver. I don't like Oklahoma at tight end, and I still don't like them at the O-line, even though I think it'll be better. The depth situation on offense is also a concern, similar to Michigan's depth at wide receiver. Wide receiver for Michigan is truly bad. I mean, the only wide receiver who I would classify as good is Donovan McCulley. Everyone else is questionable. And DB is concerning for Michigan too. I mean, Zeke Berry was very up and down for the Wolverines last year. Yair Hill was good at the end of the year, but not at the beginning of the year. For Oklahoma, team soundness isn't as concerning as it is for Michigan, but Venables has had his fair share of blow-it moments. And quarterback and wide receiver, I think, have a limited ceiling as well. Mateer wasn't highly recruited out of high school. Now, that doesn't determine everything. But if you look at his resume at Washington State, whenever he faced somewhat talented defenses, he crumbled immediately in the passing game. Now, he was a good scrambler, but now that there's film out on him, and Michigan's defense this year is going to be much better than any defense he played last season, I wonder, and it's the same for any SEC defense he plays, will be better than any defense he faced last season. I wonder, how effective will he be? It's the same thing for Underwood, but Underwood's a true freshman, so you'd expect that if he struggles. For Oklahoma, bringing in John Mateer, they're betting on him saving their season. And that is a risky bet with his resume. Let's just put it that way. I love Michigan and the Sooners both on the defensive line, at linebacker, and special teams for Michigan, safety for Oklahoma. And I love their experience too. They're both top 25 in returning production. Michigan returned 65% of their production. Oklahoma returned 70%. Both are top 20 in preseason S&P Plus as well. And both bring in classes of around 39, 40 players. Michigan brings in an average of a 90.11 rank per recruit. Oklahoma's is an 88.98. I believe I may not have updated Michigan's incoming class to adjust for Jake Garcia, but he's not going to be playing anyway, so I don't know if that's a really impactful addition. But regardless of that, these two teams are so similar in a variety of ways, that's for sure. Some other players to pay attention to before I get on to what I think is the key matchup. For Oklahoma, watch out for Deion Burks and Jaden Ott at wide receiver and running back. I think they're going to have huge years. On the defense, Jaden Jackson, Dominic Williams, David Stone, Grayson Halton. 4 D tackles for Oklahoma who I think are going to be great this year. And then Sammy Omosigho, Kobe McKenzie, Kip Lewis, R. Mason Thomas. Those are your edge and linebacker players that I would pay attention to for Oklahoma. So got to pay attention to Robert Spears Jennings and Eli Bowen at DB. For Michigan, very similar, deep defensive tackle unit. Pay attention to Trey Williams, Trey Pierce, Ike Awuna, Damon Payne Jr., and Rayshawn Benny, along with Derek Moore, TJ Guy, and Cameron Brandt at edge. Look out, I would say, for Greg Crippen, Andrew Sprague, and Giovanni El Hadi as some potential great players on the offensive line, along with Justice Haynes at running back. I already talked about the 2 QBs, so I don't want to go over that again. And then I would say look at Jayshawn Barham, Ernest Hausman at linebacker, Yair Hill at corner. I don't think Rod Moore will be playing in this game, or if he does, he won't be 100% in my mind, at least. Some matchups to pay attention to. The winning matchups here, I think, will be pass rush and protection and turnovers. You could also say run defense, too, and I maybe I should have put that in there, given how Michigan and Oklahoma, I think, upgraded a lot at running back in addition to QB, and Oklahoma upgraded a ton at wide receiver. But they also did that because their receiver room was so banged up. I mean, Michigan probably had a better wide receiver room last year than Oklahoma did. And Michigan's wide receiver room was putrid in 2024. So I went with pass rush and protection because of the new QBs and the fact that these defenses, I think, are fast enough to where, like running the read option over and over again isn't going to work. You're going to have to sprinkle that in. You're going to have to sprinkle in the run and sprinkle in the pass. I think it's ultimately going to come down to, look, the secondary versus the wide receiver group, because there you can have a lot of big play variance and scheming guys open. And I think both of these D-lines will have a massive matchup edge over both of the O-lines. So I don't think any rushing attack will have much success. Michigan's is more likely to have success than Oklahoma's in terms of consistency. Oklahoma with Jaden Ott, if he's healthy, is probably more likely to get the big play here and there at running back. So I just went with turnovers and then who can survive the pressure or who can generate more pressure. Those, I think, are the three winning matchups here. Michigan, I would give Michigan the pass protection. I would also probably give them the pass rush. In terms of turnovers, I'd have to give that to Oklahoma. They don't have to deal with the crowd noise because it's on their side, and Mateer is more experienced than Underwood. Underwood is going to, in his second college football game, have to play against Oklahoma's and Brent Venables' defense. That's a tall ask. So, personally, I think Michigan's the better team. I think they will be by a mile the better team at the end of the year. I think if this game was played in November, Michigan would win on the road. And if this was played in November and it wasn't Ann Arbor, I think Michigan would win by double digits. But the timing of the game and its location and the matchups that I've discussed, I think tilt Oklahoma. So I think that Michigan will cover the 2.5 point spread, kind of doing this for fun. And I have that logic because I think Michigan will be able to probably get a few yards in between the 20s and kick a bunch of field goals. I just think with Oklahoma having better receivers, a more experienced QB, and the more explosive running back, Oklahoma probably has the better chance of scoring a touchdown or several touchdowns than Michigan does. If Michigan scores several touchdowns, some of them will be defensive, and it will be because they keep stonewalling Oklahoma. It'll be 2021 Wisconsin versus Michigan is Michigan's path to winning. They just shut down Oklahoma's offense, generate enough plays on offense to put pressure on OU, and OU folds under its own weight pressure. Oklahoma's path to winning, I think, is a little bit more sustainable. I think if Oklahoma gets two big plays that result in touchdowns, they probably win the game off of that. So based on the timing and the home field advantage, it being a night game, I have Oklahoma winning, but Michigan covering. I think that maybe a 17-15 type game or a 17-16 type game, 20-17, maybe 21-20, 24-22, and maybe Michigan misses a 2-point conversion or something. I think that's how this game is going to go. Now, of course, Michigan covering is just kind of for fun, but the point being, I think Oklahoma will win, but it will be a field goal or maybe even less than that. It will be anywhere from 1 to 3 points, I think, will be Oklahoma's winning score. So that's my analysis on Michigan versus Oklahoma right there. It'll be a low-scoring game. I am convinced the point total for this game will be under 40. Absolutely convinced of that. And I think that both teams will combine for 10 sacks. Mateer and Underwood have athleticism, but they are not going to be ready for the athleticism of the defenses they face, and neither will their O-lines. I mean, there are going to be so many sacks in this game that if you took a drink or you ate a hot dog for every sack, you would vomit by the end of the game. It's going to be ugly for us Big Ten people and probably some Oklahoma fans who kind of got cynical last year. It'll be fun. So I'm excited to watch this game. It's definitely one of the key college football matchups for 2025. Now we can talk about Notre Dame and Miami. This is another key matchup. Takes place on Sunday night. So let's talk about it. Sunday night, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time kickoff in Hard Rock Stadium. Notre Dame minus 3.5 that'll likely hold until that game. It's a game that is set on its own course, that is set aside, that there are no other games being played during this Hard Rock Stadium matchup between this Catholics versus Convicts redo. I'm excited. I'm pumped for what should be a game that I think will decide who reaches the college football playoff and who doesn't. I think the loser, given the schedule these two teams have, whoever loses this game has another loss on their record, and that means they're either going to reach the playoffs and play on the road and probably be a first-round exit or miss the playoffs entirely. Whoever wins this game will probably still lose another game on their schedule. Maybe not, though, because this is, I think, both of the Irish and the Hurricanes' toughest game, and it's in week 1. If they can win this game and then retain the momentum they get from this win, and they don't collapse or they don't play drastically to inferior competition, then they should host a playoff game. And if you're Miami, maybe you play in the ACC championship game, although that's separate from this game. But if they beat Notre Dame, they can easily reach the ACC championship game. If they lose this game at home, and maybe in an ugly way, which is possible. After all, Notre Dame is favored. Notre Dame made it to the playoffs last year, competed for a title, and Miami didn't. Then maybe Miami has more roadblocks in their way than I and others initially thought entering the 2025 season. This matchup is fascinating because the contrast of Miami's quarterback situation and Notre Dame's. Miami's quarterback situation is all about what is the mindset and what is the health of the quarterback. Notre Dame's is how extreme is the style change between quarterbacks, because Leonard had eyes in the back of his head, was a pocket maneuvering wizard, and could be used in the run in a way that Carr won't be, in the way that Carr can't be. And then also, is experience holding back what Notre Dame has at quarterback, or is Carr just that good to where he can come out in game 1 and ball out? Those are the questions with these two teams. I happen to think that Carson Beck isn't one of the biggest questions for Miami. I think that more so his supporting cast is a bigger question. Can they reload, or do they have to rebuild given all they lose? And whether or not Heatherman can fix the defense. I think that those are the questions for Miami this season. And then for Notre Dame, it's what type of quarterback CJ Carr is, and can Freeman maintain defensive excellence after losing Al Golden? It's the first time he's replacing a defensive coordinator with Notre Dame, and he's losing a lot of players on defense. So that's big for Notre Dame. Huge. I think that if you're an Irish fan, you should be concerned about the defensive line. I think you should be concerned about the drop-off from Golden to Ash. And quarterback should concern you, especially in this matchup. It's a complete style change at quarterback entirely. And there's a lot of newness there. I mean, Notre Dame's O-line got banged up early. So someone like Ashton Craig at center, who I think is going to be probably an All-American caliber player, this will be his first game in an Irish uniform in a while, in almost a year. And he has to recover from that. So there's a lot of questions everywhere for Notre Dame, but it's the same thing, I think, with Miami. Like, what does special teams look like after you lost a great kicker and you're replacing with Bert Auburn, who was inconsistent at Texas? What about safety? Safety was pretty bad for Miami last year. And then add on top of that, your best wide receivers leave. Defensive tackle depth doesn't seem all that good. And game day coaching's been a problem under Cristobal at Oregon, and even more noticeable with Miami. I like a lot of the players on these rosters, though, and my outlook for both of these teams in the future is more positive than negative, and I can't say that about a lot of matchups. There are a lot of matchups that I'll be talking about on my channel and that others have talked about where, for example, Alabama-Florida State, I do not like the outlook of Florida State in the future. I hate it. I think they're only going to get worse as a program from here on out until I see what they replace Norvell with. And with Alabama, I think they'll get worse as a program. I still think they'll be one of the best in the nation, but I don't think they'll replicate what Saban has done and did at Alabama, at LSU, and all these other schools, Michigan State, and we could even go back to his days, I think maybe even one season, I believe it was, at Toledo. You get the point. Notre Dame and Miami are both trending up. They will only get better as programs, I think, from here on out. Some players that I want you to keep an eye on are outside of the obvious, Carr for Notre Dame, Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price for Notre Dame, and cornerback Leonard Moore. Look at Christian Gray at corner, Luke Talich and Adon Schuler at safety. I love Drake Bowen at linebacker. I think that Notre Dame has questions on D-line, especially D-tackle, but Gabriel Rubio should be good. And then Joshua Burnham, Jordan Botello, and Junior Tui Halamaka. Those are good edges. Malachi Fields could be a first-round wide receiver. I think he'll get 1,000 yards this year. It's one of my bold predictions for Notre Dame. And then their offensive line with, Billy Scrueth, Emil Wagner, Anthony Knapp, Ashton Craig, Charles Jagasaw. It could be the best in America. For Miami, they have Francis Mauigoa, who I think is the best tackle in the nation. And you also got to pay attention to Mark Fletcher Jr., Jordan Lyle, and Charmar Brown at running back. James Brockermeyer they brought in as a center from the portal, who should be good. And I like the addition they made at wide receiver with Tony Johnson, joining C.J. Daniels, Keelan Marion as wide receiver transfers, and Josiah Trader comes back. Reuben Bain Jr. is a beast, but besides him, pay attention to David Blay, Justin Scott, and Akeem Mesidor on the D-line. At linebacker, look out for Wesley Besainth, Raul Aguirre Jr., and Mohamed Toure. Incoming transfers at DB, Jacoby Thomas, Zechariah Poyser, Charles Brantley, Xavier Lucas, joining O.J. Frederic. Pay attention to all of those guys at DB. I think more of them will pan out than not, but still pay attention to them. And I think that, Brantley coming from Michigan State, he's going to be a force to be reckoned with. And Xavier Lucas was good in one season with Wisconsin. The key matchup here for both the Irish and Miami is wide receivers versus defensive backs. That is the key matchup. And you could also add in the quarterback delivering to them, for sure. But I wanted to put wide receivers versus defensive backs because I think that Carr will come out and have ups and downs, but he won't be trash. And Beck could have health concerns. So the key matchup here that I think is the most objective is wide receivers and DBs, because we don't know what the QB situation is right now. I mean, Beck, I don't know where Beck is mentally. I don't know if he's fully recovered. Sounds like he has recovered for the most part, but still there are some unknowns, and there are unknowns definitely with Notre Dame's quarterback room. I think that Miami has made upgrades tremendously at DB, and Notre Dame certainly lost a lot there. I mean, Xavier Watts is not a player you immediately replace. And while those corners for Notre Dame were great last year, part of that I think was their schedule. And the fact that, look, I mean, the only two teams they played with, top 100 wide receivers and talented QBs and such were USC and Ohio State, who put up a combined, Ohio State put up 34. How much did USC put up? Let me quickly look that up. USC versus Notre Dame 2024. Oh yeah, 35 points. So a combined nearly 70 points, 69 points combined between USC and Ohio State. So I think there was a little bit of inflation by weak strength of schedule, especially in terms of passing offenses in relationship to Notre Dame's defense. That's the key matchup here. I'm siding with Miami because I think Miami will have the much better QB in week one, and home field advantage matters. So I think they win, and consequently, since they're an underdog, I do think that they cover. Will it be a close game? I'm inclined to say yes, but because Carr is essentially a true freshman because he was injured for all of last year. So physically, he might still be a true freshman. Mentally, he's further ahead than that, I think. But Miami, if Beck is healthy and if he's back to his 2023 self, and Miami has talent at wide receiver, just not a lot of experience. Notre Dame has talent and experience there. Miami has also upgraded at DB. If things go Miami's way, they could have a big win here. A big win. Now for Notre Dame, if Carr comes out and is an immediate baller, they should win because they have, I think in week one, they'll have the better DBs and they'll also have the better wide receivers. And their O-lines, Notre Dame's overall is better. Miami's might be a little bit better in pass pro, but this is going to be a close game. It's going to be entertaining. I'm glad that it's on a Sunday night. I'm glad that it's by itself, and that way we can watch what I think will be a top 15, top 10 matchup in terms of power ratings all by itself. And that makes it special. It's a rivalry game of old from the 20th century that, was played in 2017 Hard Rock Stadium. Massive win for Miami there, but that is closer to a decade gone by than not, and these two programs are different, and I would say Notre Dame right now is in a better position than it was in 2017, and so is Miami, and I think their outlook is very positive. So I'm so excited to watch what I think are going to be two of the future great college football programs battle it out on a Sunday night. Again, nose is itching, but glad I was able to get through the segment without having to, interrupt the video by itching my nose. Now we can get on to Texas versus Ohio State, and then we will be done. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to hit the notification bell if you have not already. I appreciate your support tremendously. And again, speaking of Miami, because I messed up the bold prediction segment there, gosh, I really do not know why my nose is itching. I think it might be dust. I think I may have to dust the ceiling fan in this room because dust is like flying and then it lands on my face and it's just, it's bad. But we'll fix that. I'll go in, I'll record the I'll record the prediction segment, edit it in with what I already talked about, along with probably, I'll have to watch it back, but I don't think I reviewed the schedule in the way I wanted to. Just, I want things up to a certain standard. You know how it is. Okay, let's talk about Texas. Let's talk about Ohio State and preview this. And I'll also give an early prediction. Okay. This might be sort of a preseason college football game in terms of giving you a sneak peek at what the national championship could look like. Ohio State and Texas play each other in week one in Ohio Stadium, and they could play each other in Ohio Stadium in the first round of the college football playoff when it's all said and done in the regular season, or maybe they could face off against each other again in the semifinal, quarterfinal, or even this could be one of the games that kicks off the college football season, and then it's the game that ends the regular season in the national championship. I mean, the odds say these are top three teams in terms of odds to win it all, to hoist that trophy, along with Georgia. These are two of the best recruiting programs, two of the best developmental programs, two of the best coaching staffs in all of America. Ohio State's here by 2.5 points right now per FanDuel. This is going to be a noon game. Kickoff is at noon Eastern time, so 11 a.m. Central time for Texas folks. And what is exciting about this matchup here is how exciting and close and competitive the Cotton Bowl was. It was one of the more, if not the most entertaining game of the playoffs last season, outside of maybe the Orange Bowl between Notre Dame and Penn State. The semifinals were awesome. Quarterfinals were a little bit boring, blowouts, and then Notre Dame, Georgia, due to the postponement of the game due to the tragic terrorist attack and just how bad that game was offensively, was boring. First round games got out of hand pretty quickly. And the national championship game was exciting at the end because Notre Dame staged a comeback that failed. It was a blowout for 50% of the game in favor of Ohio State, and you knew Ohio State was the better team. In the Cotton Bowl, you didn't exactly know who was better. Once Golden went down, it was clear that Ohio State was, but at the beginning and then factoring that in and the fact that Texas was actually picked by FPI to win that game, wasn't exactly clear who the better team was until it was all said and done. And Ohio State was the better team, the better coach team. But Texas was the more well-rounded team. Texas was the more balanced team. And you see that this season. A lot of preview magazines, a lot of people think that Texas is better than Ohio State. And a lot of it honestly has to do, when I read those preseason previews and get people's thoughts, a lot of it has to do with balance. And the fact that they feel like Texas has a more balanced roster and Ohio State's is more concentrated. And Texas also returns a little bit more. And their projected starting quarterback in Arch Manning has more games under his belt and is older than Julian Sayin. And they have more staff continuity than Ohio State does. So Ohio State is favored 2.5 points. 3-point home field advantage is the Vegas standard. So Vegas is telling you either these teams are identical in power ratings or Texas is slightly better. Definitely Ohio State's the favorite due to the fact they don't lose at home under Ryan Day or Urban Meyer. And Ohio State is the largest and one of the most engaged fan bases in America. So whenever they're an underdog, their entire fan base rallies to bet Ohio State to cover as a favorite. So you always have to factor those things in. With this line at 2.5, very sketchy. But let's move past that and get to looking at these teams. Arch Manning and how good he is a big question for Texas. Will he be good, or can he be elite, or is he somewhere in between? And who are the other X-Factor players, bless me, on offense? For Ohio State, it's whether or not the staff can mitigate bad D-line and O-line depth. And if any of you contradict me on that, as many have before, it's no different from saying that, like, Texas has some questions on the O-line, although they haven't had to rely on transfers as much as Ohio State has entering this season. Ohio State's brought in a lot of transfer O-linemen and offered even more. And then the D-line depth has been something Ohio State has complained about. Texas did bring in a lot of D-line transfers, but they returned some good players there, and Texas's incoming D-line transfers are ranked higher than Ohio State's O-line transfers. So it's interesting here. And also the drop-off at offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator. If there is any. Is there any? Or is it a huge drop-off or somewhere in between? Same with Texas, losing Matthew Golden, losing Quinn Ewers, losing Kelvin Banks Jr. These teams only return about half of their production from last year, and it's week 1. So there's a good chance that whoever wins this game is not the better team at the end of the year. There's a very good chance of that. There's also a good chance that these teams look disgusting, disoriented, and it looks like maybe they've fallen off a bit from last year in week 1. And then at the end of the year, one of them might be better than they were last year, or both might be worse. That's the more likely outcome. But they're elite teams, and they're the two favorites to win the national championship. I'm concerned about Texas's red zone offense. I think Arch's mobility, if he grows eyes in the back of his head and better pocket presence, will help with that. But it's been a consistent theme under Sark. I liken it to Michigan with their red zone offensive issues in 2022 and 2021. You can get in the red zone. You have a good, you typically get in the red zone, but then the field goals versus the touchdowns, that can be tough. And also, I think that upside at defensive back, losing Makuba, losing the Thorpe Award winner from last year. Gosh, his name escapes me, and I absolutely hate that, so I'm going to look this up while talking. And also player experience. Those are concerns for Texas. In regards to Ohio State, when I look at their D-line, and I look at the fact that Hero Kanu was supposed to be in the 2 deep, Texas got him. They wanted Murad Watson, and Texas got him instead. And they do have Caden McDonald, who's big, and I like him. Jahdae Barron was the corner. How could I forget him? Jahdae Barron was awesome last year, and he'll do well in the pros. Caden McDonald is an X factor for Ohio State D tackle. Houston, many are saying is, but he's not 300 pounds, and he just put on a bunch of weight and is transitioning from edge to D tackle. So I don't think he'll be this immediate X factor player because of that. And then D end, you're relying on a transfer from the ACC, so the step up in competition is going to be pretty big. And then between Kenyatta Jackson Jr. and Caden Curry, they've had snaps, but they've never started. They've at best been in the rotation. So DT depth is alarming. DN depth is good, but the starts there is shaky. And then I think that Tackle's going to be good. I love Saraveld and Ethan Onyanwa at tackle for Ohio State. The interior, I think, looked better last year than it was due to the staff avoiding it and running a bunch of counter, not trying to run on the inside, running a lot on the outside, where their receivers and tight ends were good at blocking. Their tackles were much better at blocking than their interior. And yeah, like Ohio State was good enough at so many other positions to where they could avoid center and avoid guard in many of their plays and be the best team in America. That speaks to how insane that team was. For Texas, I think that they replaced a lot on D-line. They also replaced a lot on the O-line. They did a better job overall in the transfer portal addressing the trenches, and I trust Kyle Flood and his O-line more than I do Bowen's predecessor in terms of Fry, because he's coached the unit, and his O-line. Just a little bit there. But I also trust Ohio State more at receiver, and they lost a big piece in Ibuka. Texas lost Golden. I trust Ohio State a bit more at tight end. They bring in Claire. Texas brings in Jack Andrees. And while Arch Manning has more experience under his belt than Sayan, I do trust Day more as a game manager and even QB developer than I do Sark. So outside of really, honestly, red zone offense and a little bit of the losses at DB for Texas and a little bit of the trenches for Ohio State, I love these teams. These are top 5 caliber teams. They can compete for and win a national championship in 2025. Some players to pay attention to outside of the obvious. So that's Arch Manning for Texas, Colin Simmons for Texas, and then Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs for Ohio State. James Peoples and Bo Jackson, I think will be really good by the end of the year at running back. Luke Montgomery and Ethan Onyanwa, got to pay attention to them at tackle and guard. Ohio State's wide receiver room, you will know the names of Carnell Tate, Brandon Innes, and Mylan Graham if you don't already. I still like Edric Houston and Cade McDonald, even though I think the depth situation's questionable and Houston's a little light, but I like them. Kenyatta Jackson Jr. and Bo Atkinson at the end will be good players. Arvell Reese, I'm very high on him at linebacker, and obviously Sonny Styles comes back. And I think Jermaine Matthews Jr. and Devin Sanchez will be newer contributors at corner who I think will fare pretty well. For Texas, you got to think that C.J. Baxter coming back is going to impact their run game in a good way. Wisner comes back, and same with Jarrett Gibson. I think that this O-line at the beginning of the year will be shaky. There will be questions there. By the end of the year, I think this will be a top 10 unit with Cole Hudson, DJ Campbell, Neto Umeozulu, and Trevor Gooseby, along with Brandon Baker. Love that group. Ryan Wingo, DeAndre Moore Jr., Kalik Lockett, pay attention to them. Endries is probably not better than Claire, but he's close, and Claire's really, really good. So you're going to be hearing Endries' name called a lot. Their D-tackle room is deep. I love Cole Brevard especially, but they have, Murad Watson, Travis Shaw behind him, and some others. Colin Simmons, obviously. Excuse me there. Anthony Hill Jr., I think, is the best linebacker in America. And they got Trey Moore paired with him. Michael Taff returns at safety, and I think will be the best in the SEC at safety, along with KJ Bolden. These rosters are deep. They're top 5 in preseason S&P Plus, and they return about 50% of their production. So let's get into the key matchup here. I think it's the pass rush and pass protection and the ground game. That's what I think it is. I think that both QBs, they need to be protected well enough to where they can make the, short, intermediate, quick throws. I don't think anyone is going to burn each other deep in this game. Texas, I just have enough questions about the wide receiver core in general, and then Ohio State has Caleb Downs to where I don't think they'll torch Ohio State deep a bunch. And then while Ohio State has Jeremiah Smith, their QB in Sayan doesn't have the upside Arch does, and it's his first game ever starting. And Texas's secondary last year was better than Ohio State's in terms of balance. Their corners were better. Safeties were worse, but secondary overall was better. And they have more continuity on the defensive side of the ball in terms of defensive coordinator and defensive coaching. So I don't think either team will go over the top on each other much. I can see one big play, or 2 or 3 through the air, but I think that a consistent ground game will be better. I think that Texas's front seven is going to blow up that Ohio State O-line in terms of pass rush. I think that Ohio State's front seven, while I don't think is as good as the Texas front seven, I actually don't even think it's close. Manning was not good in the pocket last year. He was not good at mitigating it. He created a lot of pressures for himself, and Texas is replacing 4 out of their 5 offensive linemen. So Ohio State should be able to get significant amounts of pressure too. Whoever can stop the bleeding in pass protection and then who can run the ball the best, I think is going to win. That is really it there. I mean, you have some other key matchups too, like special teams. Both teams had some questionable special teams last year. Ohio State got Jackson Corville in the portal, who I think will start there at kicker. He was pretty damn good. Texas got Mason Shipley, who's pretty damn good at kicker, and then Jack Bomeister at punter. So special teams could change this game. The QB run game, I'm factoring that into the rushing game. That will impact this game too. If you're Ohio State, you got to feel like your interior is better than the Texas one if you believe in your current players. I'm not inside the Ohio State locker room. I assume they believe in their players because usually everyone does entering week 1. You got to believe you should be able to run the ball up the middle with your returning interior O-line and Texas replacing some at D-tackle. However, Sayin is not necessarily mobile. And it would be very helpful when Texas's defense, like Texas has 5 or 6 playable D-tackles at 300 pounds. And then they have Colin Simmons and Ethan Burke, who's more of a true defensive end. Simmons is a faster, twitchier edge outside linebacker. And Texas is really deep at linebacker too. If all you're going to do, if you're Ohio State, is just running back runs, that may get pretty predictable and old with this Texas front. Maybe you mix in Lincoln Keenholz. Maybe you use Jeremiah Smith or Caleb Downs or some really twitchy player to try and get to the outside. Maybe you rotate a bunch. I don't know what you do because I'm not a coach. These guys are all much smarter and will forever be smarter than I am. Texas is an advantage there because they got Arch Manning. Arch Manning can run the read option over and over again and has the speed and athleticism to make that work. I don't think Sayin does. So that makes Texas running the ball a bit easier. And Ohio State has the 2 best players in college football. So if any team is going to get the big, impactful, instant lightning strike scores, it's probably going to be Ohio State. But then again, I look at consistency here, and I think consistency screams Texas. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be. And I hate how trendy of a pick this has become. And yet at the same time, look, Texas is more balanced. Texas right now has about as many 5 stars as Ohio State does, and theirs on average are older and more evenly spread out amongst the roster, whereas Ohio State's 5 stars and higher level 4 stars are, usually younger, and the 5 stars in particular are concentrated at wide receiver. And they're probably not going to go 5 wide the whole game. Although if they did, if they could pass protect, that would be scary. Because Ohio State's wide receiver room is easily number 1 in America. Clemson and Auburn are also elite, but they don't even touch Ohio State's. I'm picking Texas to win because I think that they will do a better job of running the ball. They have better running backs. They have a better QB. They have a more mobile QB. And you can love it, you can hate it, but Texas has done better on O-line than Ohio State has recently. They just have. I mean, look at last year. Texas had Contravion Wisner and Matthew Golden as their best wide receiver and running back. Ohio State had Travion Henderson and Jeremiah Smith. And then also Quinshon Judkins was better than anyone Texas had at running back. And yet their rushing offenses in conference play were like pretty close together. Oh, you also got to factor in that Howard had way better like pocket presence than Ewers did. Way better. So when you factor in sacks to the rushing game, that disproportionately goes Ohio State than Texas. All to say, Texas has the better defensive front. Texas is bigger on the lines of scrimmage than Ohio State is. And Texas, despite losing more starters than Ohio State does in the O-line, when you dig into snaps and when you dig into chemistry, the fact that Texas's starting 5 will all be from the same school since they got to Texas, and they're the same age, if not a little bit older, and also, again, bigger than the average Ohio State offensive line, and Ohio State will at least have one transfer starting in that game, I begin to think to myself that Texas should win the line of scrimmage. And that combined with a quarterback making his first start and that quarterback having elite receivers, but facing the one defense that could actually, force Ohio State to go to other targets than their preferred number one, makes me think that Texas is going to win and that Texas is going to cover. I will actually go as far to say that I think the wrong team is favored here. I think that Texas should be favored over Ohio State. It won't happen because the minute that happens, I'll tell you, the minute that happens, 90 to 95% of the public money and public betting will be on Ohio State to win immediately because their fan base is that large, that wealthy, and that fanatical. And Ohio State doesn't lose at home. I mean, the only Ryan Day losses were to a 2022 Michigan team that in an alternate universe could have gone 15-0, an Oregon team that had an awesome rushing attack against a Kerry Coombs defense, and last year's Michigan team, where Ohio State's O-line in that game was so awful, and their game plan was so awful, and Michigan had such an elite kicker to where they won by one score. I mean, the fact that Ohio State could even lose that game, they were even capable of losing that game, and yet Texas never had a loss like that last year, also plays into this. Ohio State's ceiling is higher than most teams, if not almost any team, because of the athletes they have on the outside and the fact they have the two best players in college football and recruit well and Day's a top 2 coach. But because of how they've built themselves, they also have one of the lower floors of the top end teams if you can make them question using their outside players. Like if you can bait them into trying to be this game control, we're going to run the ball and we're going to beat you by running the ball team, then their floor just kind of collapses. At least that's how it was last year. Texas last year didn't have that same type of floor, but their floor wasn't exactly extremely high. Just see the struggles they had at QB or in running the ball. And they didn't have the same ceiling Ohio State did. That's why Ohio State beat them last year. And that's why that if Ohio State wins this game, it will be exactly how they won the Cotton Bowl. Texas will probably have more sustainable drives and will probably look like the bigger team and probably win the battle of the trenches. But Ohio State, just on the outside, is so much better that they're able to get some big plays, and they win the turnover battle because of the home field advantage and the fact that Ohio State has a player in Caleb Downs who's unlike any other. I think he'll at least get one interception or one first turnover in this game. I'm excited to watch it. It'll be one of the first games of the college football season. Noon kickoff, week 1. Man, whoever wins this game, I think, is a lock to reach the college football playoff. Whoever wins. So this is a game that has some urgency to it because Texas and Ohio State do have 2 losable games outside of this matchup. And I think either team will miss the playoff if they go 9-3, which, again, isn't likely. I mean, Vegas is picking one of these teams to win and yet favors both to reach the playoffs. But this is still an impactful game for sure. Okay, that's it. We're done. And with that, I am going to leave you all because I got on 2 hours, 20 minutes ago. And yes, we did a lot of videos. But I'm tired. I need to relax, I need to do some schoolwork, and I need to start preparing for next week's shows, among other things, and also get, the Miami and Clemson videos corrected to my standards. I'm a Michigan fan, but I'm picking Ohio State by 10 plus against Texas. That's very interesting. It's possible. I think, again, though, if that happens, it will be the same way of last year. It won't be because Ohio State destroys Texas on the interior. It's because they get big plays, and it's because maybe they get a pick 6 or a scoop and score, for example. Like, let's say Ohio State comes out with a wonderful initial drive, 7-0, and then Manning throws a pick 6, 14-0. And then that changes the game because neither team, I think, is moving the other defense all that much. Not so sure about this Texas pick. The shoe will be rocking. It goes against a lot of my better judgment, but that's also because I'm more familiar with Ohio State than Texas. I just think that I don't know. I think that the staff continuity and the fact that Texas you all can look this up. Texas on the D line is bigger than Ohio State at D tackle by like an average of 20 to 30 pounds. It's crazy. And then at D end, they're similar, and Ohio State doesn't have anyone like Colin Simmons, for example. And then you go on the O-line, and Ohio State is theoretically more proven there, for sure. But Texas isn't far behind, and Texas's starters are more talented and also are bigger. And they have O-line coaching continuity, and I don't think anyone would debate that Kyle Flood is a better O-line coach than Justin Fry or currently Tyler Bowen. So I think that Texas is able to limit enough of the big plays, either through pressuring Sayin or just playing really good defensive back football, to where I think they come out with a win. Could be wrong, as always, like I could with any of these. I mean, I'm picking Oklahoma, Texas, and Miami. I'm picking all the southern schools to beat all the northern schools. And yet I'm a northern guy. Kind of funny how that works. But thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you all very soon. Tomorrow, be there at 6 p.m. Eastern Time.